Okay. So from chapter 279, where we're up to, we're up to following where we were left off last time. Page 565. The Maimon Tzim B'Mishpat Tepada starts a so-called another subplot within the whole Ayin Beis plot.
What was that word?
Subplot.
But the main fascinating thing is this. The way I see it is that the discussion here begins. Remember, we're talking about ultimately the interface to connect the mortal with the immortal, the human with the divine, the finite with the infinite. But as we understand, it's more complicated than that. It's not just a mathematical quandary. It's also a psychological one. Because the battle between the yesh, the ego, the self, and that which is beyond the self, God. So, in the previous chapters, the whole discussion was around Hashem Ma, which means Bittul. Ma means Bittul. That divine name is the power to Atzilus, to Tikkun, to repair the imbalance in Tayu, where there's an imbalance between the self and what is the kavanah, what is the purpose. In other words, plain selfishness that we experience is of course the real battleground. But in a subtle form, selfishness doesn't begin with selfishness. Tayu is the epitome, the embodiment, reincarnate of self-interest. Except there, self-interest is in the context of energy, of light, of even divine light. But it's about me. See, before the tzimtzum, there's no me. There's no self. There's only one divine reality. And where there arises the will and all the different language used, shir atzmei b'koyach, whatever, how God envisions existence to be. But once there's the tzimtzum and there's the actual concealment, a whole new, everything changes. To put it in simple English, the glove is turned inside out. Before that, delikus is b'pshitis, the divine is what's obvious, and anything else will be a novelty. After the tzimtzum, it's the opposite. Existence is the reality from our perspective, and the divine is a novelty. It's called Elamas b'pshitis. The world, existence is obvious, and we have to work on finding where is the God within it all, so to speak. Now, of course, the higher levels after the tzimtzum don't have that problem because they're still aware of the divine. There's no concealment, utter concealment. But they're no longer completely like the light before the tzimtzum, which is completely just an expression of the divine. Before the tzimtzum, it's not possible a world like Tohu, for example. It's just not conceivable.
Wait.
But after the tzimtzum, because there's now a concealment, so there's an imbalance, and the imbalance begins, and Tohu manifests that imbalance, called the market correction, however you want to explain it. But in Tayu, there's an imbalance where there's energy, there's containers. So it's the beginning of what's going to come later, but they're imbalanced in the sense where the energies don't tolerate each other. The kelim don't work with each other. There's no giving and taking. And ultimately, it's still, as we learned in the last mimer, it's still a form of bittul. As a matter of fact, it's very intense, but it's not about what God wants. It's about what the energy wants. So in any way, it's almost like, a way to envision it almost like in a science fiction way would be almost like God created energy, and the energy is like going a little out of control, doing whatever it wants. Tikkun repairs that imbalance.
Don't have that problem. You made a little statement.
Yeah, in Ak there's no Tayu. Ak is not, or Ak, Akudim don't have that problem. The world of Ak, Adam Kadmon, doesn't have that issue.
Oh, so that's the highest level after the tzimtzum.
Yeah.
Then lower than that comes the world of...
No, then comes Akudim.
And then comes, but it's lower, the tail is lower than that.
So, Ak is Adam the Bria the Klolos. Akudim is Adam the Yitzir the Klolos, and Atzilus, and lower is Adam the Yisir the Klolos. I would actually suggest, you have a chance, learn with someone, or the Maimer, I can tell you where it is afterwards. It's called Drush Gimel Mine Adam.
Yeah, where is it?
It's printed two places, Eira Teira
You
Balak,
printed it. Where is it?
Eira Teira Balak, and Eira Teira in Yonim. Learn the one in Yonim, it's more accurate because it's a later version. It's basically a map of the whole picture after the tzimtzum. The Alter Rebbe's mind. The Alter Rebbe spells it out, and after the Alter Rebbe spells it out, some of it adds a lot to it. It really puts everything in place. All these questions, yeah. The Alter Rebbe has a mimer in it.
Where?
Also, my moim in Yonim.
Where's your map?
Tzemach Tzedek has...
Where's your map? You can go to the map.
that's something else, yeah.
But if you want that map, go to that map. That's the most accurate one you'll find, and it's very, very good. So bottom line is, you know, this whole, there he even has the question, why come Atzilus the Klolus is never mentioned? And that's reestablishes, as a matter of fact, I looked at it a few days ago, there he says there he really establishes very definitively that there's actually Kabbalists that explain Atzilus the Klolus in a different way, and the Alter Rebbe established Atzilus the Klolus is Erin Selflessness Atzilus. And Malchus the Ein Sof, all the hidden spheres are all part of Atzilus the Klolus, the general. But that's another discussion. So going back here, so therefore that's the whole, I'm summing up now, what I just summed up is over 100 pages. Of 100 pages of the discussion of how the Bittul, is ultimately the key element that Tikkun has, is that it's not about itself. You could say, and sum up in one line, you can say Tayu is about itself and its energy. He says it's not kafia kavana el yena. It's not according to what the kavana is. And in Tikkun, the repair takes place primarily because it senses what the purpose, the higher purpose is. And what is the higher purpose? The higher purpose is that there should be diversity, that there should be harmony within diversity. And that constitutes of two things. That the energies should be tolerating each other, which lays the ground that the energies, as they manifest in the containers, work with each other to the point that you can't even tell the difference between one and the other. It's all one. Like a human body, like nature, using examples that we have in our own lives. Now, the next, I would say, it was the next, we said 26 chapters? Yeah. From Reish Ayin Tes 279 till 305, till chapter 305. So what is that? 79 to 305. 21, 26 chapters. So page 661 begins a discussion dissecting this concept of how this bittul actually takes place. Because remember, we still are looking for the methodologies. This is all like laying the ground. Now, if you recall, there was also the discussion of the three stages of maturity. Remember, Ibur, Yunika, Meichen, how in our own lives, how you develop and mature from a place where emotions are the most intense power. Then the intellect begins to tame the emotions until the Meichen is where you have real self-control. So that's how it plays itself out psychologically. And so therefore the emotions are like the domain of, you could say, of Teyu. Teyu, the emotions run amok. They're just wild, untamed. And Tzmeichen, the mind that has the bittul, remember ultimately Chachma and Chachmas Tema are the key interface point. That wisdom is what is the tool to tame the self-driven, self-interest, the emotions that are the self-interest, the self-focused, self-absorbed emotions. So now begins a whole discussion
of is Chachmas Tema the interface or Kesed the interface?
He made it very clear that Keser cannot be the interface itself. Chachmas Tema is a level within Keser, and then the Rebbe Rashab outside of the Befeirish, he said Keser alone cannot be, because the higher level of Keser is always the domain of Ein Sof, of infinite, of the divine. The lower level of Keser is always the domain of Netzalim, of the structure.
So what goes on there?
So ultimately there's no real meaning. The Rebbe Rashab said this Befeirish, chapter I think Reish Samach Tes or something like that. I mean, no earlier even. I mean, it's specific. So he said, so you have to say there's something else. What is it? Chachmas Tema.
Yeah, that was before. That was before.
You would never change that.
I know, but here it sounds like he's trying to create...
No. One second. But he never changed it. Chachmas Tema becomes the meeting point. What's Chachmas Tema? Remember, Chachmas Tema is Chachma of Arich, which is also connected directly to Atik. So it's a meeting point between Atik and Arich. That's the key point.
It's a mahutza between Arik and
Right. So, but the advantage that it has is it's unconscious, so it's more domain of the divine, but it's chachma already, so it has the shape and the structure of what will later become wisdom. Then from chachmas tema, he brought it down into chachma gluya, because that chachmas tema is the root of conscious mind. The conscious mind also has these two elements. So the conscious mind becomes the interface.
It's funny
now, of course, in general, Atzilus is the interface, but remember, Atzilus is chachma in its full blown. Remember, there's a hologram here. So there's no such thing as a one level and that's it. This is not a black and white picture here. Everything is a hologram. You understand, Yossi?
Yeah.
So therefore, once you explain the Chachma is Tima, now the Chachma is Tima manifests in Chachma. Chachma is Atzilus. Remember, Chachma, the beginning, Chachma is the beginning, wisdom is the beginning of the flow of any world. But when you say Atzilus is in general Chachma, Bria is in general Bina, Yitzir is in general the Vav, which is Midas, motions, and Asiya is Malchus. But and all four are there in Atzilus. Then from Chachma, this is the Chachma's Koyach Ma, so it has both elements Ma and Koyach. Again, like the Pella and the Aleph. You know, if you want me to sum up properly, this is the Pella and the Aleph. The two interpretations in the Zohar, whether wisdom only senses awe, Pella, wonder, or Aleph is Pella, wisdom is awe. So that makes wisdom Chachma a interface. And that began the whole discussion of Shem Ma, which is Chachma. Ma and Chachma are one, or Atzilus, which is the power. What is the power of wisdom to be able to create this type of interfaces? Because wisdom is the beginning of the structure of existence as we know it, but it senses and is able to transcend itself and go to a place that's beyond what we know. So that's a perfect interface. But faith, for example, pure faith, Amunah, is suspending yourself. It's not structure. It's accepting and believing something beyond us. Pure Seichel Bina, comprehension, understanding, is me understanding. Chachma is the bridge between faith and reason, you can also say. But it's not faith as in you have to believe it. It senses that which is beyond with Seichel. It's like where the mind can sense there's something more than me. So that's the key element, because without that, there's no entry point. There's no way, there's no bridge. Now, of course, the work now is, we all have these moments of inspiration. The work now is to maintain it. Let's say for a moment a person senses there's something beyond. That doesn't mean they're not going to fight with people. That doesn't mean they're not going to be selfish. Because the hard work is you still have a world of emotions to deal with. So that becomes the whole discipline of Aveda Push. It's simple working on yourself. How you take Chachma, and Chachma is an instrument that helps you bring that Bittul, that sense of the divine, into your real life, into your relationships, into working with people, you know, on a day-to-day basis, in Elam Asiyah, Hagashmi, Hachumi, in this selfish world. That's the challenge. But we have at least a tool. There's hope. It's not just an airtight reality where we just live in a world of the id, or the world of selfishness, and so on. Now, it's very important to remember that in Ayin Beis here, he doesn't discuss it yet on the very yesh level. Everything is here very subtle. He's talking all about the yesh and kedusha. But I'm applying it this way because that's what we can relate to. But he doesn't really apply it except in a few places when he gets down to it. He's usually on a very, Ayin Beis generally is very much on the let's call it on the blueprint level, you know, on the structural level where this plays itself out. So now what happens now, which, you know, the best way I would describe the next 26 chapters is a real drama of how where Ayin and Yesh meet and fight with each other. Because the real battle is between the Ayin and the Yesh. Now that we've established that there's a Chachma within each of us, we all have wisdom. And let's say us, I mean existence, the structure. And you also have the Yesh. So now begins a real detailed dissection, which will lead ultimately to the methodology of how one actually does this. How do you master the art? So the way he describes it is going to be, it's called Ayin and Yesh. Ayin simply means nothingness. In our language, Bittul. The sense that when I say nothingness, nothingness doesn't mean here a vacuum and void and annihilation. We're talking about nothingness as a sense of no selflessness. And Yesh is self. So selflessness meets self. What happens when selflessness meets self? So in most cases, if you ask practically, most people say, well, the self wins. Once in a while, the selflessness wins. Obviously, the goal is that the balance should be, that the ratio should begin to close in, and that there be more selflessness. In the words of Chassidus, Eir is selflessness, Ayin, and Keli is Yesh. Remember, Eris and Kelim in Atzilus and in Atoyo. So we're not talking about Eris and Kelim in Bria or Yetzirah Asiyah. But it all begins, the battle between Eir and Keli in Atzilus, manifest full-blown, is the battle that each of us has every day between ourself and selflessness. And that's what this discussion begins here. So to explain this well, the Alter Rebbe Rasha begins dissecting what exactly is Eir, what exactly is Ayin. So I'm going to review orally here, first chapter 279 and 280, and maybe we'll stop and learn some stuff inside, but I'll learn the 281 for sure inside, but let me just sum up. So the real drama here, you hear Yossi? Battle between self and selflessness. I need your name on the record. That's right.
Okay.
They won't know which Yossi, but okay. So one day, 100 years ago, who was that Yossi? Oh, the chassid from Dor HaShvi. Yeah.
Understood selflessness.
Yeah.
You mean you want to make sure it's not your brother?
So maybe we should have here. Someone here, can someone play act selflessness? No one else play act self?
Exactly.
Self, we all can volunteer. That's easy, right? Okay, so there's a battle. These two come, there's a battle. So we, for example, look at a flame and a wick. And we use that as the example. The flame wants to go upward, right? Up, up, up. The wick grounds it. Ner Hashem nishmas adam. This is, in a physical reality, the closest to approximation of what the battle looks like between Yesh and Ayin. Ayin is looking to go upward. It's always looking for that which is beyond. The Yesh is looking for me now, right now, survival. And we have these two voices inside of us. Tanya is an Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh Abam, it's Tevi, it's Sahara. It's all a manifestation of Ayin Yesh, and its root is Eir and Keli. But it's critical to explain, Eir and Keli are both Kedusha. In Atzilus, they're both Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad. They're both divine. But they're the beginning. Remember, before the Tzimtzum, there's unity. There's no duality, there's no plurality, there's nothing. There's only unity. As soon as you have Eir and Keli, which is only possible because of the concealment of the Tzimtzum, even if it's Kedusha, bli gvul of Kedusha and gvul of Kedusha. The infinite, divine infinite, the divine finite. All holy. But now already you have two. As soon as you have two, it's the beginning, the root of all problems. But it's the kavanah. That's what God wants. Now, for example, Adam and Chava, when they were in Gan Eden, this is critical because also even in healing or in dealing with any problems, there's symptomatic medicine, there's preventive medicine, or getting to the root. When you really want to understand that people have a problem, or one individual has a problem, you want to understand the root of the problem. So Chassidus is brilliant in that, because it never lets you get away with just fixing the thing. You have to always go to the root. Everything has a root. You see Rabbi Akiva's students arguing, you don't say, because they didn't get along in business or something. There's a root somewhere. And the root is always in Kedusha. It doesn't just begin with people just being selfish. Because selfish people also you find people can get along. So the root of it all, it's like, I think I once wrote an article called It's the Tzimtzum Stupid, The root of it all is the Tzimtzum edition. You can blame everything on the Tzimtzum edition. Chassidim always blamed it on the Tzimtzum edition. There's no Tzimtzum, there's no concealment, we wouldn't have all these issues. But then, there's a mimer from the Alken Yemer HaMeshlin, from the Frierdiker Rebbe, Tafresh Tzaddik, he goes through the roots, he goes through the root of the problem. So it begins with the Tzimtzum edition. After that, it goes to Shviras HaKelim, which is Teu. After that is the Miyut HaLavana, the diminishing of the moon. And after that is the Chet Eitzadas. And then, of course, the rest is history, as they say. So the Chet Eitzadas will be the root of the Chet Egel. Chet Egel will be the root of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. And basically every problem goes all the way back to the Chet Eitzadas. So if you want the Tzimtzum Arish. So it all begins with the concealment. There's no concealment, there's no diversity. There's no diversity, there's no battle, possible battle. Adam and Chava and Gan Eden. They're both created by God. Yitzir Kapav Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu. They're told, here's a tree of life, here's a tree of knowledge, good and evil. They could have easily, not easily, but they could have listened. And they would have not eaten from the tree of Mashiach would have come right then. So the Rebbe once said, I remember at a Fabringen, so what happened? It says that the Eitz Adas, there's four opinions what kind of tree it was. Figs, grapes, esrog, or ta'ina, not ta'ina, wheat. Right, it's not an apple tree, by the way. Adam's apple, that's not. I have a theory where they got it from, that it's apple. Because there's a tasteless in Masech, I forgot what Masech, where it says that according to the opinion, it says, Kimin tapua chaya. It was like an apple. Because esrog, according to the opinion, esrog looks like an apple. So if someone doesn't know Hebrew, Kimin tapuach, you could think it does say tapuach, Kimin tapuach. Anyway, so the Rebbe once asked a question, famous question, that according to the opinion that it was a vineyard, it was a vine, they would have made kiddush on that wine a few hours later. Because remember, it was all Friday when everything happened. It was a very eventful Friday. The Gemara has all. And the Rebbe brings from a Farshim, I think the Shifzech Kayan on the Torah, and a few places, Parshim Deshin, they says that those few hours was the whole difference. So how is it possible that they couldn't control themselves? The answer you have to remember is Adam and Chava represented all the human race. So think of them as 7 billion Yetzer Haras, all in one. You understand? So it's not so simple. You know how hard it is to resist the Yetzer Hara even for a minute? So they had to resist like the equivalent of all of our Yetzer Haras. And they knew and the Yetzer Hara knew the stakes. The stakes were that if they didn't eat from it, the world comes to redemption. So they made so the resistance was tremendous. And so it's hard to put yourself in those shoes. It wasn't just a few hours and let's make Kiddush or something. So remember, when you're Friday afternoon and you have some temptations, think about it.
It couldn't be like today's Hayom Yom, just two of them, so...
Well, but the two don't, it didn't work. The point is, however, that began the root, but how is it possible that they should eat from the tree of knowledge? Now the question is asked, if the tree of knowledge gave them the knowledge of good and evil, how could they do something to defy God before that? And the Nochash represents the Yetzer Hara. So the answer is that they had the potential because it's after the Tzimtzum. There's no longer. If they were living before the Tzimtzum, it wouldn't be possible Chet Eitzadas. They wouldn't have the bechira, the will to do it. Anyway, to go back here, so what we're up to now is, I think, it's a fascinating battle. What happens when self meets selflessness? So the first step is understanding what selflessness is and what self is in the root. In Eir and Keli here. Remember, we're talking Eir and Keli. If you want, and this just as a matter, I say this because I know, I wish someone said it to us when I was a bacher, but I came to learn it. Everything's a hologram. Whatever you learn about Eir and Keli, you could apply in broader terms to Atzilus and Biyah. You can apply to the light before the Tzimtzum and the light after the Tzimtzum. Everything is applicable on many levels. But here we're talking about it in the context of Eir and Keli. So the first step is, what is Eir? So let's define what Eir is. I'm looking at page 565, chapter 279. And basically this chapter is going to dissect Ayin. Ayin is the word for it. Ayin as Eir. Three key things in Ayin. Three elements. Or you could say 3 levels of Bittul. 3 levels of Bittul. So he says right away at the beginning, he says, you can see right away, whenever there's the Lashon of Bir Ein, Yesh Lahagdim Tchila, he's starting now like another subplot, so to speak. Yesh Lahagdim Tchila is a sign for a subplot. So he says, Yesh Lahagdim Tchila Inyan Ha'er V'Hakeli. I say it because it's critical, especially once you get, the Chassidus says the trick of the trade is that when you get into Bina, you have to keep on reconnecting to Chacham or else you get lost. But that, you can get wander in the wrong place. So it's always good to go back to the beginning of. That's why I actually marked in my book here a line because this, as you learn the details, you always want to go back. What was the point of departure? And the point of departure is we want to know what is Eir and Keli, and he establishes right away. Ayin Beis Hovchim Tachlis. They're two opposites, ultra opposites. They're two antithetical entities. Liyas Yadua, as it's known, Be'ikar B'chinas Eir Keli Shazal B'chinas Ayin V'yesh. That the primary, remember, Bavarnik, Eir and Keli has many, many features. But the primary element of Eir and Keli is this is Ayin, this is Yesh. And let's just translate what it means. The Eir b'chinas Ayin dafka. Eir is b'chinas Ayin. Ayin here, the word Ayin means nothing, but meaning here selflessness essentially. Dafka, v'chol inyan li is b'chinas Ayin. The whole inyan of Eir is to be nothing, is to be selfless. Is to be, basically, to put it in more sophisticated English, should be an instrument of something higher than itself. Eir reflects its source. That's its inyan. The purpose of Eir is to not be about, it's not about me, it's about what is being conveyed through me. Let's put it this way. What is being transmitted through me. That's that's Eir. V'akeli, hu b'chinas Yesh, dafke, and Keli is b'chinas Yesh. What does Yesh mean? It's about me, it's me. Now, we will of course learn that Eir and Keli are necessary for existence to be. Because if everything was just, if things was, there was just an Eir, you wouldn't have substance. You wouldn't have a substantial existence, a substantial universe. So Keli is where it plays itself out. Where the problem begins is when Keli and Eir and Yesh, where Eir and Ayin, where Eir and Keli are diverge and they don't focus on one. They don't fuse into one. So essentially, Eir and Keli come from two different personalities. One is Ayin, one is Yesh. Ayin Beis Hovchim, two opposites.
How did when you have the concept of Teo thrown in, it's lacking Kelim and it's very selfish and I can't merge what you're saying now about or Ayin and Teo, because Teo is basically.
Well, if you learn the last chapter, he said clearly that you could have Eir that is interested in its own interest. When there's a lot of intensity there, when there's a lot of intensity that Eir has, it like he uses here as expression. He says like this: that even though b'Teo there's Bittul, but the Bittul is b'chinush yesh, and it's not according to the higher kavana. Since be'etzem they're yeshes, even the mitzias they're taken from mitzias, and the Bittul is taken from Bittul. For example, Eir, if Eir does not understand that it has to go into a keli, it becomes very self-absorbed, and it just what happens is in its personality it becomes detached, doesn't want to go into the keli. That's going to be the end of this discussion.
At what point it becomes corrupted? At what point does it become corrupted?
This is what he's going to lead to. Look, the bottom line is like this: if Eir and Keli are left on their own, Eir and Keli won't join each other, because Eir, by its nature, does not manifest. It doesn't want to go with the yeshes. Understand? It has to be told. Eir will go because remember, Eir's personality is selfless, so it will listen when it's told. But it's on its own, so to speak. If you leave it on its own, let me put it this way. Your question is a good question, but I want to just elaborate a minute. What he's saying here is that Eir and Keli, right now, what they are individually, they're personality types. So Eir is a personality of selflessness. Selflessness in general doesn't want to go where there is a self, because it's not comfortable there. It would be like why would like a chassid doesn't want to go to involve himself in the material world unless God commands him to, or the Rabbi commands him to. Eir on its own is selfless, but selflessness itself can become selfish. Not because it's a yesh, but because it indulges in its own personality. You understand? He's not saying that yet. You will find that. That's Eir to tell you what I just described. Eir of Tikkun understands the higher kavanah, so its selflessness is channeled into doing what it has to be done. But if you want to put it purely, the one is selfless, one is self, and it can get corrupted, as you put it. And when it gets corrupted, by the way, in much ways, it's much worse than the keli, because it has a emes to it. Because remember, it's Eir. It's defined by being selfless. It's the equivalent of the greatest damage done by great people who did not listen to the kavanah. That's really what it came down to. Look, to put it bluntly, the three people who went into the paradise, except Rabbi Akiva, were Eir without keli. The two children of Aaron, Nadav and Aviv, Eir without Keli. I'm just giving you examples of it. This Talmidei Rabbi Akiva, Eir without Keli. Rabbi, when he came out of the cave and everything burned, he didn't tolerate. That was Eir without Keli. So it's all everything I described was all kedusha. There's not one here that came from a place of klipper. None of them are selfish, just doing it because of their own self-interest. But it's where Eir loses sight of its source. That's only possible after the tzimtzum. Remember, after the tzimtzum, even Eir can lose sight, and that's Toyev. Tikkun repairs it. The question is, because Tikkun, we learned in the last chapter, if you remember 2 chapters ago, that Atzmus, that is ultimately able to combine everything. That's why that chapter is so critical. Learn it again if you need to. It's a critical chapter. Chapter 276, on 560, page 560. There he makes the rule that only Atzmus creates a scholars. True unity in diversity, true harmony within diversity can only come from Atzmus, because only Atzmus has everything within it. And if you remember, he said that it's ma and not ma at the same time. It's substance and no substance at the same time, like Moshe Rabbeinu. Because it is a paradox. So really, Eir itself cannot really do it, because Eir itself does not, and Eir on its own is just like Keli. It only has one kav. It has one personality, the personality of selflessness. Keli has the personality of self. Who brings them ultimately together? It's Atzmus. But Eir can sense it if it has Bittul. Keli can't, because the Keli is like blind. A Keli has the root of Atzmus in it, but it doesn't have direction. And Eir, basically the neshama, when it senses what the divine wants, it can bring the divine power to unify the two. But on its own, Eir can be equally problematic, left on its own. But Eir, by its nature, does want to listen to what the divine says. But it could get corrupted. But here right now, he's not talking about the corrupt part. Let's talk about the pure part. So Eir, he established, is Ayin.
Question.
And Keli is Yesh.
We said last week about this heritage, this scholars of Keli comes from the Mitzusim Atzmos, right?
Same place, yeah.
Right? So Would it be right to say?
Good.
Would it be right to say the fact that human beings have this thing of that they need one each other also comes from that Mitzvah Matzmosei?
Yeah, I wouldn't say the word Mitzvah Matzmosei because he didn't say exactly what you're saying. I would say a little bit. What he said was in that chapter 276 was that like this. That just like to create the yesh that feels has no source, comes from atzmus. That's mitzvah atzmusei. The same thing, hiskalus comes from the atzmus. But I just want to correct, it's not the mitzvah atzmusei of atzmus that makes the hiskalus necessarily. It's atzmus that does the hiskalus. Because atzmus, as he said, has everything within it, and it's all in the way that it's all completely one without any distinction between them. So the answer is absolutely yes. Ultimately, real cooperation, the real ability for people like us
Because we're
to be able
selfish,
to,
like.
yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, because you could say, how is it possible ultimately if all of us here have self-interest, and the Eibusher doesn't want us to destroy our self-interest, he doesn't want us to destroy our individuality, I should add. Individuality, remain individuals, and we should all be one without compromising ourselves. That concept, that paradox, can only come from the Atzmus. But remember, once it comes down into a system, there's ways to, there's a method to it. It's not just, some type of irrational, super rational idea that comes from Atzmus that we can't achieve. There is a systematic way to achieve it, but its root comes from Atzmus, and we could be kalim to Atzmus if you want to put it that way. I say kalim, I don't mean this kalim like here, but I mean to say, yeah, we can manifest it. Remember, it all comes down, everything comes from Atzmus. But Atzmus wanted Atzmus to manifest in a logical system. And the logical system can relate to these concepts. So it's not. So even though when you say you're dependent on Atzmus, it doesn't mean that there's a whole bunch of steps and processes that we can do to absorb that experience. So that's part of what he's up to now, which is explaining the ayin and the yesh, eir and keli. So now he says like this. Let me sum it up first, and then you learn this inside.
Yeah. 3 times.
3 times. Okay, so three key components here. He's explaining now how do we dissect air. So when you say air is ayin, is because air, how do you do it? The chol ikar b'chinas air b'chinas gilim min ha'etzem. That's the definition of air. So air is ayin, but what does that mean? Because the whole ikar, the primary thing of air is that it really, I said it before, it's a channel for something beyond itself. It's an expression of something that's beyond itself. It's critical to understand this because we naturally don't gravitate to this type of concept. Because we grow up in a world that is about self. And as I said before, the self comes to figure out that maybe we do once in a while something that's not self, interest. But from the Ma'ila Lamata, if you look at existence, how it came to be, it was the other way around. First there was selflessness, then there was a self. So it's just important to remember that this is counterintuitive in the way we naturally think. The concept that something is a gilim in ha'etzem, you tell a person to this that something, there's a concept that something is not about itself, it's about expressing something higher than itself. That's a novelty to most people. A
lot of people won't agree that it exists. The concept of essence and essence and expression.
Yeah, no. Some people will say actually that even that is also selfish. Any hardcore Darwinian will say even when people cooperate and they give is because the self knows this could be a better self by being giving.
There's no such thing as essence.
There's no such thing as bittul. Right. Okay, so no, I'm just stating it because we sometimes look to this and
because we believe that there's an essence, there's a bittul to the essence. But if you don't believe there's an essence, bittul to what?
Now the point is that why am I saying it? Because sometimes you learn this in Yom Chassidus, that itself creates a dichotomy. You know the Chassidus, and then it doesn't play. It's important to know that this is itself a radical statement that challenges the status quo. Let's put it this way. This challenges the status quo. So eir b'chinas gilim min ha'etzem, v'hainu b'chinas eir ha'moyer min ha'etzem, ha'dovuk ba'etzem. That's the energy that radiates from the essence. It's dovuk ba'etzem. It's cleaved. Dovuk. How would you translate dovuk? Cling, but it's more than cling. Dovuk means it's attached, but not like attached of 2 separate things. It's like it's a dveikus is more than just clinging or attachment. I mean, cleaving is sometimes the word used technically, but what is cleaving? It's like, think of it like when a flame touches another flame. What happens to them? They become one. That type of connection. It's like almost a subsumed. Okay.
Like a dibbit.
No, but you see here, the point is that it's David Ba'etzem, okay? The Mishum Zeh B'chinas Eir. And that's why it's Eir. So this alone you could analyze for a lifetime. This line, these 2 lines here.
Well, that's what he does.
Yeah, yeah. No, but I mean to say, so that's why it's Eir.
That's a good.
Eir v'ziv HaShemesh. Now, of course, the classic example of always, remember, Chassidus always uses examples from within our lives, but then always, after it gives the example, always explains and qualifies that it's not exactly an example, because it's not, remember, Eir in Ruchnius is not Eir Gashmius. Eir Gashmius has properties and is a manifestation of spiritual energy, but it's not the same thing. And as you see, I noticed, we've already talked about this. Air is more energy than it is light. Remember that, because light is just one form of energy. Sound waves are also air, technically speaking. Like the light and the reflection of the sun. By the way, Chassidus talks about the difference between air and ziv. It's not relevant here, but they're not the same. Air is more subtle, ziv is more tangible. There's a letter from the Rabbi, if you want, on this in Chelik Zayin L'Kutei Sichos in Sazri and the Safas. There is in Eir and Ziv. Shehu Eir HaMeir Li is Dovek Ba'etzem. It's a radiating light, a radiant light. Why? Because it's Dovek. It's connected with energy, with essence. I'm sorry. That's why it's like the essence. That with the essence, the sun is essentially a luminary, and therefore the air, which is double b'etzem, also illuminates. Now, just to give you context, for example, other things are not that way. If I, for example, pick up, let's say, an object right now, or I write something, or I create something, I build something, what I build is not necessarily a reflection of my essence. It's one thing that I happen to. Light is reflecting you. So if you were to say giving off your own light would be something that's reflecting your deepest interests, your deepest intimate feelings, or something like that. It's not just you speaking about the weather. Speaking about the weather would not be called air, for example. But speaking about yourself would be called air. So air is always, because air by its nature is a servant, so to speak, an agent of the source. So it's constantly connected to the source. It really has nothing else but it. So it reflects what that source has to say, has to offer. If the source is a luminary like a sun, it gives off light. If the source happens to be something that is not light, it will give off whatever that is. If you can, think of it in those terms.
So a ziv is a type of aura, that's all it is.
It's a different level. Yeah. But you say, since you use both words, I just wanted to qualify that. That's why when there are concealing clouds, the light doesn't shine. In other words, why not? You could say the sun give off light, there's clouds, and the light should remain here under the clouds. But because the light doesn't have anything on its own. It's not like someone pouring you a cup of water, and even if they leave and the source is gone, the cup is still with you. It doesn't work that way. Light always is an extension of its source. Put something and block the source, and the light will cease to be. Which goes back to our status quo. What do we think about things? We think we're self-created creatures, self-made men, right? Self-made people. So therefore, hey, once I'm here, I'm here. I'm on my own. We don't sense that we're an extension of a source. If we really sensed it, not just intellectually, felt it, then we would be nothing but what that source is. We'd say a tzaddik. And the Alter Rebbe would fall asleep on Friday before Shabbos. Rabbi Hill would go to sleep. The Alter Rebbe fell asleep because he was aligned with what was above. It wasn't even a matter of choice. I mean, probably he had choice, but he was aligned. We have to look at a calendar to know today's Yom Kippur, today's Purim, Chanukah. A tzaddik aligned to Atzilus, there's an energy that's flowing. When the Alter Rebbe was in prison, it says he knew the hours, even though he was locked up based on the tzirufim. Hashem Havaya, your day is the 12 hours of the day, 12 hours of the night. So the concept of being completely aligned to something which is above yourself is obviously completely not in our realm. We don't have that. We have maybe times you're aligned with a vibe. You can say, you're aligned with a certain situation. Chassidim, I mentioned last week the story about the chassid that even though he had his own understanding, but he aligned himself to what the Rebbe wanted, therefore he solved problems as the Rebbe would have solved them. But that comes with training and work. It doesn't happen overnight. Again, we're not talking about a puppet who has no seichel. We're talking about a puppet, someone who has nothing on his own. It's not really it's not really a shliach as we spoke then. But actually, you can't say is a puppet because is not in that context, but doesn't have anything of its own. Which, by the way, is also its undoing at times. Because if it's not told by the Moira what to do, it could also go crazy, The same thing is with Chayes HaNefesh. The Nefesh, what is its main property? Life. So the air that comes from the Nefesh, the energy of the soul, is life. It carries life. So air basically is a carrier of the source. That's what air is. He's not going to discuss Keli here for a while, for a few chapters. All this is about air. And all this is a mashal for above. Okay, so now he's going to explain the same thing in Ruchnis. And here I'll just sum up this chapter, and then we'll move to the next. Basically, he says three things. And they all are postulates of each other, actually. So once we establish that air is davuk to the mar, which means in simple English, the air is an extension of, and a channel of the light, of the source of light. So there are three things in this. One is that the air is exactly like the light, the source. In the expression says air me'ein hamar. And the air is me'ein hamar. And since the essence is itself something that is beyond existence, the essence is not a yesh. So the air also, being that it's reflective of the essence, is also like the essence in this sense. It's not about a yesh. Now, what does that mean? Because the essence is not a selfish and self-absorbed entity. The essence is beyond definition, as we learned earlier. So therefore, the light that expresses the essence is also one that's beyond definition, beyond shape and form. Keli, on the other hand, as he explains in the parentheses, would be, for example, the fact that it says in Tanya that if the world would see its source of life, it would cease to be. So you could say everything is that way. Everything, therefore, is like air. Right? All of existence is air, because the only reason we exist is, like he says in Tanya, is because we were blinded. We're closed. Our eyes were closed from seeing the sustenance, the life force that's giving us existence every moment. But this is the key distinction. But that's Keli. Keli that doesn't sense.
Can't see me.
It's called it's called, like he says, it's ein a margus, ein a nirgus. It doesn't feel. So it's not a form of dvekus. Existence is ultimately divine energy, but it's a divine energy not like air. It's a divine energy that doesn't feel that it's connected. So you can't call that air. You could say it's dependent on it, but it's concealed from us. So that in that context, so basically the existence as we know it, that's really what Kalim is about.
But is Ur something that's new? What's Ur? The definition of Ur is shining somewhere else, or is it shining for himself too? Like does the Hebrews?
We had a whole learned on this. I would say this whole subplot is a subplot of a subplot that goes back to the whole beginning of this Hemshech. Go to Shavuos, Ayin Gimel. I'm going now back to 300 pages. This whole is explanation when he began that there's two types of energy. One is just real air, is just reflecting. The etzem has no purpose except reflecting the essence.
And that always.
And then there's an air.
Was that like?
No, Atzmus is the only thing that always was. Nothing else.
It also came about.
Yeah, but
when
you
he wanted to make the world.
But remember, listen. Ayin Beis is made up of parts. That's a whole discussion that goes back literally hundreds of pages back. But if you just, I'm just answering with the record. We're not talking that at all here. Remember that's Atzmus is the only thing that has no beginning, has no end, is the essence of everything. Not even Kadmon, beyond Kadmon, like we learned. But that Atzmus wanted to be expressed. The first expression is an air that's just expressing the etzem. And we learned, he asked the question, what's the purpose of that air? And the purpose was to create bittul and other things. It doesn't have effects on existence. Then there's air, you can call that generally air makif if you want. Then there's an air primi, that the air already has a purpose. The purpose is to manifest within existence and achieve things. The whole Ayin Beis is this. The whole beginning is this. There's the air rotzen, kesa, is an air that is a energy that just doesn't get into details. Air primi is what manifests and creates life, as we know it, the details of life. Anyway, here he's talking, of course, air on a lower level. So the first thing with air is that. So we already distinguish air and yesh. Yesh, therefore, exists. He's just the reason it's a parenthesis is because it's a qualification. It's like a footnote. It's a footnote stating, just for the record, being thorough, everything in existence is really dependent on the source. But there are things that recognize it and things that don't. In other words, there are those that know they don't know, and those that don't know they don't know. Let's put it this way. Air knows it doesn't know. So air always knows that it always is aware of its source, like the light of the sun. Where it comes to yesh, meaning the nevroim, creatures like us, as we exist, it's also the way that it's dependent on its source, but it doesn't sense it. So now he says three things. The first thing is that it's similar to its source, and that's why it's ayin. The second thing is that it feels. Yeah, I'll point out where these three things are. Then he sums it up afterwards. So it's like this. So, okay. It's not just they're all davuk. First is also davuk. They all come from dvekus. He says that clearly.
No, but the first one is me'ena moer.
No, but because of dvekus, however, they all start. Look, davuk is a rule. It's critical because you learn later. It's critical.
I saw later also, but
no.
Always by the second
nirgish, one. Nirgish is the key.
I hear you. It's just that. Okay.
Let me explain it. You'll see in a moment. It's very relevant.
I'm just telling you that it's interesting that every time that he says this level, he always brings the word dvekus, more than in other cases.
And then at the end he says all three have dvekus, and it all starts from dvekus.
Oh, okay.
Makes it very, very clear. So,
where is that, by the way?
Next in the Perikrish Pei. Okay. So he says like this. Remember, he already established the rule. As soon as he established at the beginning that it's davuk, then all three have dvekus. That's for sure. He said it right in the first line, for the third line. Davuk, the etzem, shum zeh b'chinuseir, the fifth line.
Yeah, so by the way, in that line you see the three levels because it says gilu min etzem, then it says meir min etzem, and davuk b'etzem. You know what I mean? You can only see in the. I know. I'm not arguing. I'm just saying that you see gilu min etzem, meir min etzem, and davuk b'etzem. But it's almost as if he's introducing the three levels.
But the third one is not davuk according to you. The second one is davuk.
Isn't the characteristic of air
dvekus?
Okay, whatever.
Doesn't air need to be davuk? B'chlal.
Yeah, okay.
That's why why I'm insisting on this, because that's not an option. Davuk dvekus is the essence of all air. It has to be davuk.
Okay.
Davuk means that it's one. Anyway, the second thing is
nirgash.
The second thing is, he says,
it feels it.
Since it's connected and it's attached to its source, it feels its source. And therefore, it's ayin and bittul. Which means now like this. The first, we'll sum it up at the end of the chapter. He sums it up that himself. The first level is ayin and bittul because it's like the source. The source is not about self, so the light is also not about itself. You know, hypothetically, in the first level, you could say if the source was a yesh, then the air of a yesh is also a yesh. In the second level, however, there's something different. In the second level, the light does not sense itself because it senses that it's always coming from somewhere else. That's a key distinction. It's not ayin. It's not selfless because the source is selfless. It's selfless because its own personality is not about itself.
Conscious level of selflessness, as opposed to the first level, is not conscious.
You could say it in that way also. Yeah. So that's the second thing. So therefore, ayin bittul gabi mekere. And here he brings the language. This is very important. The language ein zu loscha. We say in davening Shabbos, we say efes biltecha, ein zu loscha, ein arech lecha, ein zu loscha, ve'efes biltecha. Right. So he's going to explain these three levels. They're very, very vital in the whole understanding of these two chapters. I'm summing it up because then it's easier to understand it inside.
And the fourth chapter is Radla, Rachel Leyada.
Yeah, why?
The fourth thing, that's
das weiß ich nicht.
There's two opinions here. Sometimes Ephes is the fourth, and sometimes Ephes is the third.
Yeah, it's
But
it's
you
split.
went into a fourth.
That's still
But let's explain it. So you know,
Yada is also Balthus Botracha?
yes, absolutely. There's two opinions. There's two. He says clearly. There's two pirushim in Ucham. There's two pirushim. It depends. We're not there yet. 1 second. So level number 2 now is Ein Zulascha. Why? Because the Be'er Nirgish Echshu Levade Ve'en Zulascha. The light senses that I'm nothing compared to the source. There's nothing but him. And Hu Levade Ve'en Zulascha, only him and nothing else. V'zeh Bittul Shabe'er. That's the Gan Eden Gili. That's the Gan Eden Gili. That's why we say Angel Loscham Al Ken L'Chai Elam Haba. Here he's talking about Elam Haba and the interpretation that is Gan Eden and so on. In general, that's the Gili of the Kav in its root. The Kav senses that. And this is all level 2. The Kav, which is the root of all light, after the Tzimtzum, senses this element that there's something beyond it, and therefore it has nothing of its own.
First level, he doesn't even
Now,
know
just for
he's
the
in it.
purpose.
First level, he doesn't even know he's in it. The second level,
No, the opposite.
the opposite, because it's a higher level.
The second is higher level. Yeah, it goes higher. It climbs higher. But we'll learn it inside in a moment. I'm just summing up here. Now, just for the record, since we're really talking about it, to really put it in a picture here. Remember, we're talking here all about and Ayin. But as you'll see, it constantly qualifies it with the Yesh and the Kalim. So one qualification was, as we learned from Shaykh Amunah, that the Yesh also is dependent on its source, but it doesn't have, but there it doesn't feel it. So now he also bavarns it in the language. In davening, it's Ein Areich L'cha. So the Yesh of Elam Hazeh, remember this is Keli already, senses Ein Areich L'cha, that God is beyond us completely. That's going to be relevant to later, but right now, so the Yesh senses this completely beyond us, and the Ayin senses that is nothing but him. So it's a different type of sensation. Yesh cannot sense its source. It can only sense that it's something far beyond me. Senses its source and senses therefore that I'm nothing. Everything is him. Eined Movade type of thing. Okay.
What would be if we felt?
And F is Biltecha in this interpretation, the parentheses, 1 second, is really the third level of air that he's going to say in a moment. F is Biltecha is the air, the way it's kol ba'etzem. The way the air is in the source. But he's already saying it here in the parentheses. So just because since he's interpreting the tefillah, so we have basically Ein Zulascha is the second level of air. Ein Areich is Yesh and Keli. The first level of air is not mentioned in the tefillah here. And the third level of air is Efes B'Techa. There the air is completely within the source, like the light of the sun within the source of the sun. There's no light even. You can't even call it energy or any type of light because it's all inside the source. That's why Efes. Efes is stronger than Ayin. Ayin means there's nothing. Efes means zilch, zilch, nado. Right. So basically, anyway. And then this, yet, by the way, when you learn it inside here, he doesn't yet say it's 3 things. At the end, he sums up. But they're all cause and effect. So we began like this. Let's just again sum up. The first air is davuk. Air is connected to its source, and therefore it's similar to its source. The source is not substance, so air is also no substance. The second level is that because it's davuk, because it's connected, air senses its source. It's a sensation. So air has a sensation. Since it senses its source, it senses I am nothing compared to it. Everything is the source.
That's officially a higher level.
Not only officially, unofficially.
No, it's a sense of self. A sense of self would seem to be more or less of a bittul.
No, the first one doesn't say there's no sense of self. The first one just says it reflects the source. Here, the air senses the source. The first one also maybe senses. How do you know it doesn't? Does not talking about it. In the third level, now comes the third level. The second level leads to the third one. Because it senses the source, it says here, and this is also the reason, because it senses its source, it wants the source. This is now a third thing. Air gravitates, it yearns to be part of the source. And that leads to a third level of bittul. And here goes the bottom of the page here is this Teva Aliyah. And basically he's saying that it's like Teva Kol Dover L'Hamshech L'Gabe Mekere. Everything, the nature of something is to go to its source, return to its source. Same thing with light.
But that's when you see God in the dark.
But this is only possible if you feel and sense the source. Because if you don't feel the source, why would you be drawn to it? Mashen can be yesh ma'ayin. You don't have that. Yesh does not feel its source. Therefore, it's not drawn to its source. Adra b'teva yesh later lamata, as he will explain later. So we basically have is that the yesh doesn't have any of these three things we just said. It's not similar to the source. That's why it doesn't. That's why we like he brings. We don't. It doesn't feel the source, and it's not drawn to the source. All three things. Ayin, Ayr, and Ayin have all those three things. When it is similar to it, it feels it, and it's drawn to it.
And when it's drawn to, when it goes into it, is it what happens to it?
That's going to be discussed. That's exactly what he discusses.
Like Srafim Aimdin.
1 second. What you're saying language that you learned that no one else learned, that we didn't learn here yet. That's the next page he says that.
He does, right?
Yeah. So let's not jump the gun.
Like Kesser says. Kesser. Because he wants to be on top.
Okay, so it becomes Eis Messias. That's what happens.
Dies.
See the face of God, you die.
No.
Learns to get
By the way, that's not. I would say is not the pshat here at all.
No.
If a yesh sees the face of God, it dies. If air sees the face of God, it becomes its real reality. That's where it wants it to be. No, but it doesn't. What I just told you, if yesh sees the face of God, it dies. Air doesn't die. Air becomes alive when it sees the face of God. It becomes what it really is. It's its true nature. That's why air and yesh are not the same. It's the exact opposite of what you said. Rewire a few ideas and you'll get it.
Yep.
Huh? You hear what I just said? Only yesh has a problem with seeing the face of God. Light wants to see the face of God, and it thrives there. Because it doesn't have substance of its own. That's what it wants. Why would it die? The Rebbe once said, Bittul doesn't become Bittul. The more Eir goes into the more it's reality. That's what the personality of Eir is. We're not talking about yesh. I'm saying yesh. God said, you, Moshe, cannot see my face and live. You as Moshe. But not you as Eir. Eir can see God's face and live, and as a matter of fact, that's where it's most alive. That's the whole point of this whole section. It doesn't lose. It doesn't have an identity in the first place. So the less it has of it, on the contrary, the more air is outside of the source, the more it loses its identity. It's the opposite of yesh. It's a different personality. So it says on top of page 566, like the light of a flame that is always reaching upward. V'lula hapsila, without the wick, that grasps it, that grounds it, it would completely expire and be encompassed within its source. He adds, one of the reasons for this is dafke, who say dak, that's dafke because it's a very subtle element. Should be kid of yesher el mekeda, and it's very close, therefore it's very similar to its source. This is relevant because remember he said before that there's the idea that it's not just that air senses its source, and not just that it reaches toward it, it also has similarities to its source. So all three elements that we spoke about in air are interdependent, and each has something that the other one doesn't have. It does go from lower to higher, but nevertheless, each one has something that the other one doesn't have. So that's what he just added here. So air has personality elements that are very similar to the essence. Same thing is with energy, like it says in Sefer Yetzirah that Esses sphere is blima. The 10 spheres without substance. That's referring to the light, the energy, the air of the spheres. And the Sefer Yetzirah gives the example, like a flame that is bound to its to the coal. These two are going to be 2 out of the 3.
What does it mean that Gimel Rishayna Shabbai? It says, because Gimel Rishayna Kirav Tchem Dafka Tavaliyah. Can you shed some light on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Shed light on light. Okay.
Yes.
Goes
Why
like this.
dafka? Why dafka? Isn't a ilah feel magish? Why dafka gimel shenis?
No, because remember, look, think of it this way.
It's a link. The top part of the link.
Right.
Wasn't it Gimel Hashem?
Gimel Shenis is Chachma Bina Das.
Oh.
Gimel Shenis. Yeah. In every structure is made up of 10 spheres. You say Gimel Shenis, Ayin Tachtenis. So Gimel Shenis is always Chabad, or Kesach Chachma Bina, or Chachma Bina Das. Depends how you count it. And Zayin Tachtenis is the lower part. So it's really how the structure. So if you think of air as being multidimensional, as we're saying here, 3 levels, so it would be the highest parts of air that sense, of course, its source more than the lower parts of air. He's not really going into the details here. It's just being, he's being thorough.
That's
so
the way it is.
In other words,
it's obvious.
in other words, the parts of earth that understand that there's higher.
No, it's like, think of it, 5 students with a great teacher. The greater this, the better students are gonna yearn and gravitate more to the source, because they sense it more. They're closer to it.
So middas are more for like.
The next.
He doesn't really discuss it here. The point is, bottom line is that air has levels. Air has levels, and then there is. Remember, well, it's not relevant here. Let's. So now he says there's 2 levels in this That's level 2.
Right.
That is kosher. It's kosher. It's bound to the end and connected to the coal. It means it's connected to the source. Okay. Rabbi is the second element. When you see a flame, if you see a hot coal, there's a second element. That it actually elevates and is drawn to it. Now, I don't know if you can actually see it in a coal, but you see it, as he said, in a flame. So now he's going to sum up these 3 things.
In the mashal, it's attached to makor, but it's also moving away from its makor. It doesn't seem to be.
It actually glows. What's it called? You see a burning ember, a burning coal. It's not moving. It's back and forth. It's almost like a flame. You could see it connected to the coal. Because it doesn't. It's not like unless you blow it or blow on it or you fan it, right? It doesn't go away from its source. It continuously gravitates back to its source. If you look at it, that's why. What is it called? The simmering, not simmering, not glowing. Glowing embers, right?
Yeah, there's a flame in the.
Yeah, you can see the flame. You can see the flame. You even see when you do blow on it. You see right away it goes back. If you don't keep fanning it, it continues to being drawn back to the source. You see that physically. That's why he gives this example.
You just get a real example of an ore being completely different than its source.
Why do you say that?
What do you mean?
The source of light.
You have a piece of coal, and the ore.
But the coal is not relevant. That's why he said, if you look v'hainu, not the coal. The kishal kshur b'chel. He says here, hainu b'mekeshu ha'esha b'gachel. It's the flame inside the coal. Don't think the coal is meaningless here. The coal is a fuel.
Okay.
The coal is not the source.
Okay.
It's just the flame within the coal is the source. That's why all these examples. The sun would be the sun. Remember, the sun also has other things that are not even fire or heat or energy. The sun is a substance, but in the context of it being a source of light, these are all examples. Ultimately, remember, at the end of the day, we're going to come back to learn that there's a part of Atzmus that's not a moir. Since when is Atzmus is not necessarily a source of light. But here we're talking about Atzmus as a source of light and wants to give off light. So the advantage of light is that it reflects what its source gives off. To put it, I'll give you another example. I gave the example before. If you or I, or any of us, would go, let's say right now, and write an article or build a little structure, and then no way does that article or our structure have to reflect who you really are. But if you wanted to communicate what's really going on inside your heart, and through words and so on, that is coming from that place. So yesh would be, you can build things that are not necessarily reflective of who you are. Is an expression of who you really are. That's the whole understanding of here, what is. It's a very subtle thing, and there's a lot of examples. If you get too scientific, someone will say, what do you mean? The sun is just is a physical entity, there's a lot of fuel in it, and when it turns into fire and light. But we're talking here about the example of, that's why I preface by saying that we don't have in existence, we don't think of this way. This is not how we think. We don't think about things being reflective of something beyond themselves. You know? Like I use this example of sunlight with secular people, and the first question, which I don't use it anymore without this qualification, the first question they say, what do you mean? The sun is a yesh, and the light is a yesh. And that's it. Just another yesh. One looks like light, and one looks like a table. They don't even understand. They don't see a subtlety in it. It's only when you see, because Chassidus starts from the root, it's trying to understand there's a God. Like you said, there's an essence. It's reflective, and then we have existence. But if you begin from the level of existence, you could argue the whole thing is just one. Everything is just one different types of yeshes. This type of yesh, that type of yesh. One looks like flames, one looks like light. That's why the way you have to begin with, you can't begin with the sun. So in other words, the child would begin to say, you know what, let's look at sunlight and we'll learn what Bittul is about. No, you have to first explain what Bittul is. Everyone senses that there's something greater than us. And then we find examples of it in existence that begins, oh, that light. Light is an example of something that reflects something greater than itself. But I'm saying you have to begin that, or else you know that axiom, you're gonna get, there's nowhere to go. So there are three types of bittul ba'er. I didn't research it long enough. I wanted to see if there's anywhere else that actually says these three things. I found these three things in separate mamorim, but it could be that the Rebbe Rashab actually is the one that sums it up. But I'm not sure. I'm almost sure it's not the case. But I have to find it. Because it doesn't say Yesh Lemer. Usually he says Yesh Lemer if it's his own Chiddush. So Nimtza.
Yeah, but could be. Even Nimtza could be that you just put it together.
Yeah, the three types of Bittul and Er. Because till now you can still say, who says three types of Bittul? Three features, three elements, three personalities in there. But he's actually saying three types of Bittul and Er. Echad Mashuhu Me'en Ha'etzem. See the second one you'll say. Like we said, it's similar to the etzem. Carries similar. That means that there are things that are not similar to their source, and there are things that are similar to their source. So that's the first thing. Is similarity. It's a commonality. Second, Habeiz mepnei shenirgesh by mekere. One second. I skipped a line. Harihu b'chinas ayim b'chinas heder amitzias kamay etzem. Since it's similar and it's commonality with the source, with the essence, that's why it's heder mitzias kamay etzem. Just like the etzem is not made up of a mitzias of yesh. It is a mitzias, but it's a mitzias that is it's called a sublime mitzias. So also, therefore, being that it's similar, it's the same personality, which is heder mitzias. I know he didn't explain how you can argue that the etzem is a mitzias, but remember he's talking here the etzem of
mitzias built to mitzias nimsa, no? You can say that. He said chas v'sholem before. But when he said that you say a mitzias of etzem, he said chas v'sholem. Remember before, a couple pages ago.
Yeah.
It's a mitzias built to mitzias nimsa.
Okay, I didn't know if everyone's about Al Malek so the mitzias built to mitzias nimsa so simple. Okay, fine, right, correct. So the essence is not an undefined essence. So air also therefore is not defined by itself; it's undefined. Habeiz mepnei shenirgesh by mekere. See, he doesn't say here davuk.
Right.
It feels its source. Harihu b'chinas bittul da'em zulase she'en kula kamei kala. This is a deeper level now. Since it feels its source, it is complete. It has bittul that there's nothing else but the source. And this is the inyan of kula kamei kala, that everything compared to the source is nothing. So clearly it's a higher level, because here it is sensing that all of existence and everything is null and void compared to the source, essentially. The first one, as I said, hypothetically, if the source would be a mitzias, then so would the air be. Here the air has already a sense of subtlety, of that something that's beyond, that it's nothing compared to something beyond. Hagimel shu b'chinas aliyah v'yiskalos b'mekere. Here you could say there's actually an active thing going on. The air is not, you could say in level 2, you could say it's passive. It senses that ein zulase, there's nothing but its source, but it's passive. It remains where it is. No, air is restless. It seeks to reconnect to that source. So it doesn't remain in its state of being. It seeks to connect, and that's the level 3. Aliyah v'skalis. It elevates and wants to be encompassed b'mekayde in its source. Aliyah is davar b'fnei atzmei, not to be on its separate thing. Ki im liz b'chins ayin b'mekayde. It wants to be ayin. It wants nothingness in its source. Let me just refer to. I said it before. I'll say it again. The Rebbe once said it. It's an excellent way of explaining this and a lot of things. He says, Bittul cannot kenish bottle werden. He uses it in explaining a mimer in Kafir Tzadi Dalet, a very profound hemshech from the Alten Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe, which was never finished because some chassid, the Rebbe called a fool, told the Friedrich Rebbe was too deep for the chassidim. So,
Tzadik Dalet?
Tzadi Dalet. You know the story?
I heard it once.
Yeah. He told the Rebbe that Friedrich Rebbe is too deep, so the Friedrich Rebbe stopped saying it. They say later the Friedrich Rebbe said, we want to give pearls, and people want to have zuckerkes, candies. And the Rebbe yelled at the guy. The Rebbe has our Rebbe. It's too deep, so don't come.
Shas Meiser?
No, it was too late.
Oh, no.
He didn't say it in public, he said it privately to the Friedrich Rebbe.
But I'm saying, it was at the time that the Rebbe... Yeah? Oh.
The Rebbe was around. Tzaddik Dalet.
Why would you listen to this?
And as a matter of fact...
You realize who he's dealing with.
Hold on, as a matter of fact, listen, this is by the Rabbeim, like Benedictine was a drink on the table, but someone mentioned once something, and when someone mentioned, the Rebbe, privately was one thing, but when someone mentioned publicly, it became like, it's a sign that people... Tzaddik Dalet actually is built on Ayin Beis at the end of the second volume, Ayin Vav, so we really have the continuation, except we don't have it with the whole elaboration. Because there was basically, he talks there about 3 levels in Bittul also, and then he talks about the 4th level, and then, but the 4th level he never got to. But when Ayin Beis came out, we found the 4th level there, and we found my modern from the Rebbe that was from Ayin Beis. So
is the 4th level the one that mentions here already?
No, it's on a higher level. I mean, I have to compare it. I don't know. It's not from here. It's from the second part of Ayin Beis.
No, but here he mentions right.
I know. I think it's higher. There, they're talking about Eilif Natzim. But
here also says Eilif Natzim.
Yeah, but the bottom line is like this. So the Friedrich Rebbe then says one of the things the Friedrich Rebbe adds that's not an Ayin Beis. So but it's not the same sugya as that. It's a different. You have to compare this to the end of Ayin Vav. You want to do it, please? Look, I'm not sure. I think it's different because there's different lashonos. A lot of different. There it's also about. But I'm sure it has a connection. So the Rebbe Friedrich Rebbe adds there a very profound statement. He says that the difference in Gashmius and Ruchnius, he talks a lot about there. That Gashmius, he says, its Metzius is not Mitzar Atzmei, and its Kiyum is not Mitzar Atzmei, which means its being is not its own and comes from somewhere, and it's also its Kiyum. How would you translate Kiyum?
That it continues to exist.
No, that's not what he means there. That's what I'm supposed to say. Kiyum. The way he explains that its reason for being is also not on its own. In Ruchnius, he says, the Metzius of Ruchnius, the existence of Ruchnius is not from its own, it comes from a source, but its Kiyum, its reason for being, is Mitzad Atzmei. It's from its own, not from a source. So the Rebbe has a whole footnote there trying to explain what does this mean. And he gives an example from Nigla, from Machzis HaShekel. I can go to I'll tell you briefly what he says there. He says like this, in Machzis HaShekel, there's a paradox. On one hand, everybody had to give half a shekel, but once you gave it, it became part of the Mom and Sibur. It became part of the public monies. You can't come and say, I want back my half a shekel. It's too late. It's like it became now new Metzius. Right, Hegdish. However, it says in Pasha Kerach that when Moshe is davening, that it says Al Tifun Elman Chasam. He says that the Eibishter don't listen to the mincha, the korban mincha of Kerach and his group. The korban mincha is a korban sibur that was given by the collective that was bought with a shekel. So what does it mean not to listen to their mincha? At this point, it's everybody's. It's like saying there's a tefillah b'tzibur. Sibur. We're davening. A chazan is davening for the whole sibur, and to say don't listen to their part of it. Their part is not there anymore. They're gone. It's not part of the. But no one can come and say, it's too late.
Moreover,
if you didn't take it from them in the first place, if you didn't take it from them in the first place, it's one thing. But now it became part of the public. You can't say, that Either don't listen to anyone's mincha to everybody. So the Rebbe says, so you see an example here that the mitzias is not there, but the kiyum is still there. There's something from them still in there that you could like have. Anyway, then the Rebbe writes,
Yeah, it's not simple.
no, it's not. The muscle can be. But anyway, so Rabbi Alva Shalom Noska Gerari from Montreal, son of Moshe Gerari, went into Yechidus, and when that Maimer came out, and asked the Rebbe to explain further. So the Rebbe said to him a bunch of things. I heard
this is before the Nesias, you say. Understand?
No, the Maimer came out of Tavshin Yud Aleph, this Hemshech Tzadid Aleph. It was printed in a Kuntreisen. You say for my mom Tavshin Yud Aleph, yes. It's Kuntreisen that after like Basel Lagani, the Rebbe printed Kuntreisen for another 2 years after Yud Shvat. So this is so the Rebbe has footnotes. This footnote is there. It's a long footnote. It's very very heavy stuff. So he asked the Rebbe to explain the Ha'ara. So I heard a lot of things, but the main thing I want to repeat is the Rebbe said to him. The Rebbe said a few things. The Rebbe said, I don't want to go into all of it because it needs explanation itself. The Rebbe said then that was meinst du noch ein Zimtzum is what he said. Noch ein Kav is the Zimtzum bottle geworden, something like that. And then or maybe the opposite. Noch ein Zimtzum is the air bottle geworden. The Rebbe's main line that I think is unbelievable. The Rebbe says, Bittul kenish bottle werden. And since Ruchnis is Bittul, so its kiyum is mitzad atzmei. So let me explain what that means. If something, the whole point in the Maimer there is that everything that's Gashmias really doesn't have any substance of its own. Something had to put it there. But Ruchnis, by definition, is defined by not being substance. Its personality is to be bottled to something else. So if you annihilate it, you actually feed it. That's what it wants. Because its personality is bittul. Yesh, its personality is not bittul. So you annihilate it, it doesn't exist anymore. Something that is by definition, let's say air. So think of it like air is, the essence says to air, I want you to transmit me to existence. So the air does it. But the air is by nature's bottle, so it's bittul, it wants to go back to the source. It doesn't need to be. It doesn't need presence. It's the epitome of the opposite of kavod, and opposite of everything that we identify with. Air by its personality epitomizes selflessness, real selflessness, not selflessness that wants an award for being selfless, and not selflessness that, like the Rebbe says, not someone running away from kavod and looking over their shoulder if kavod is pursuing them. We're talking about truly a personality of bittul. So therefore, that's what means that he says kiyum mitzad atzmei. So in other words, basically the idea that the substance of the shekel is no longer there, but but it represents everyone. You are represented by the carbon. Listen, this can be explained on and on, but I just wanted to say it because you see that's what's going on here. So that's why when the air wants to go back into its source, it's not because it's self-destructive or suicidal. That is its real essence. So there's more source, the better for its point of view. The less I am, the more I am, basically. And yesh things the opposite. The less I am, the less I am. That's why I'm saying it's a completely different axiom. You take away something from someone in the material world, they have less. They may say, you know what, I'm doing it because it's daka, or because it's right, or because God blessed me, or whatever, or I need it for my avodah. But in ayin, it's natural. Which in a sense, in other places it says that's why ayin is no avodah. For air to be bottled doesn't require anything. That's what it wants. Is the psila? It's the wick that forces the light. If you didn't have something grounding it, air would go right up and would disappear. It has no problem with disappearing. Now the question is whether we can meet any human beings that are that way, and not people with low self-esteem. We're talking about people with high self-esteem, but don't need to be present, don't need to be heard. I think you have.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we should give him an award.
He was waiting for that.
So what's the bottle? What is Bittul kenish bottle there?
Bittul kenish bottle there. It's a melody.
In a way, Bittul can bottle when beverta yesh.
Yeah, that's correct.
The more bittul it is, the more bittul it is.
The thing is, if you really think about it,
Bittul kenish bottle.
It's not real bittul.
Yeah.
No.
As long as you're Bittul kenish bottle.
The guy is.
But the point is like this. You see, yeah. But the point is like this. You see, the bittul of toyu, there's a problem because what happens? The bittul kenish bottle then and then it makes everything else also bottle around it. That's also not healthy. See, ultimately, it can be also its undoing, because if you just leave it up to Eir, the whole existence would be no l'shevis yitzar. It would be like Rashbi. Everything burns up. Anything that's a yesh should not be able to exist. That Eir's perspective would be that yesh should be annihilated, because it's opposite of what reality is. That's its nature. That's why Eir does burn things up if you don't have a concealment.
So
That's why Eir Shav Lifnei At Tzimtzum. Now this is interesting. Eir Shav Lifnei At Tzimtzum, you can say, was the epitome of this. Because if God wants a Metzias of the world, why didn't Eir Shav Lifnei At Tzimtzum feel it and just leave existence? Because Eir can't. Eir has to be concealed.
the set of instructions is the Keli.
The set of instructions, Atzmus says, Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum comes from a place that's deeper than light, and that becomes the beginning of the Keli. Yeah, exactly. Keli is expressing what God wants, and Eir is expressing what God is, if you want to put it that way.
God wants and what God is.
Oh, God is, meaning on the Gilui level, of course. Yeah, you could say that, exactly. Eir expresses what God is, and Keli expresses what God wants. And now he explains that these three levels of Bittul, this is the end of this chapter here, no, Psalm 280. He explains now what the three levels are, and he says basically, to sum up briefly, it's the way Eir is in Kalim, that's level 1, that it's similar to that it senses, it's similar to the source. Eir, that's a little above Kalim, Chachma, is the way Eir is senses its source, and the Eir, the etzem, the way it's in its root and its source, is the third level, which is even higher than Chachma, Keser, basically, as he's going to explain, is elevating and craving to be reabsorbed in its source. So it's three levels of Bittul. So basically, you could say it's Bina, Chachma, and Keser, if you wish. It's Eir in Kalim, it's Eir outside of Kalim, and Eir in the etzem. That's what he's going to say right now. Those are the three levels of Eir. So the first one is, so I'll read it inside, I'll read it. Yesh nemer de b'chinas Ayin liyesem eina etzem zabachos Eir gam kameshim mislavish ba'kelim. The Ayin, the first level of Ayin, the selflessness of energy, being similar to its source, is the general energy as it manifests inside of Kalim. And here you see, just for the record, I noticed also in these two chapters, he quotes more than regular, many chapters earlier. I think this is somewhat of also a summary of the beginning of the Hemshech. He's bringing together the whole Eirus and Kalim. Because remember, the beginning of the Hemshech talks, first 20 program, first 15 program about Eirus and Kalim, however, how they fit each other. And now, he's connecting it. So you see right here, he goes, chapter 14, all the way there. The Gamma Eirus HaMashalshukim Are B'chinas Pshitas L'Gabi HaKelim the Metzias HaSfiras Mamish Chachmu Chesed L'Ba'Kelim. It says earlier that even the Eir, not only Eir higher than Kelim, even the energy that is inside the Kelim is still comparative to the Kelim, relative to the Kelim, to the containers, are Pshitas. Pshitas means they don't really have much substance. L'Gabi HaKelim. The Metzias HaSfiras, Sfiras, the real substance of Sfiras, Mamish Chochma, Chesed, Bina, Gvura, so on, who ba'kelim. Avla Eiris and B'chinas Pshitas Liyesim B'chinas Eiris Shu Me'ena Etzem. But the Eiris are much more subtle. They're not defined by Chochma. They're not Chochma, but it's still not as defined as the container because the Me'ena Etzem. This is first level, similar to the source, and that's why they're not yet shaped and defined quite much like the Kelim. Okay, that's one. That's level 1.
We said before.
So the level 1. So level 1 is that even as it manifests. Even as it manifests in the containers, it is connected to the source, and therefore similar to the source, and therefore it still has selflessness. It's very important to say this because remember, you can say, you know what, Eir higher the energy before but not in the container. That's where it's selfless. But once it's in the container, it loses its selflessness. No, it's selfless even inside the container. That's its mila here. Now, why is this critical? Remember, in the interface, you need all three. Because remember, at the end of the day, the interface has to be one that every level is connected to the higher level. So what you're seeing really, that Eir itself has both sides. Eir, how it's inside of a container. It's selfless. You see the beauty of this. So that's where you can see. So in other words, you're not going to annihilate the keli because the air goes in the keli, but it still retains its selfless personality. Then there's air that's like the middle level, that's higher than the keli chachma, but now it's more selfless, but it's still closer to the container. Then there's air as it's in the source. And the truth is that all three levels are connected to each other. So essentially, what you're having here is a formula of the interface for bringing Bittul into a world of Yesh. So selflessness meets selfishness. It has tools because it has something to speak to on the terms of the selfish Yesh. Because I manifest inside of you, and I still maintain selflessness. In other words, it's like you can and then there's the higher levels.
What's the quality of this art that even when it manifests itself in Kalim, it still maintains itself?
The main thing he focused on is similar to the market. It maintains the similarity. I'll give an example. I mean, it doesn't use examples here yet, but I'm trying to find an example in our own lives of all three. Let me finish all three, and then maybe we can describe it. So find some examples in our lives. You see, the example I would use would be if you're sent on a mission. Let's say a shliach. We talked about shliach being somebody that chooses. It's really a yesh that chooses to be like Eir, but think of it like someone chooses to listen to the instructions of the Mishalech, whoever's sending. Now he's in a new place, and he has a situation going on, and the source is not there to tell him what to do. We had the story with Tzemach Tzedek. So he has to figure out on his own what to figure it out. So when he figures out, two things can happen.
Ask him to not going to do the opposite.
One second. Two things can happen. He could end up doing something that's not the way the source would have, the Mishalech would have done. And he could even justify it and say, you know what, he wasn't here, my teacher, the Rabbi or the Mishalech, and this is what seemed on the ground seemed like what needed to be done, so that's what I did. I made a mistake. So that's obviously not Eir. That's Keli. Eir would be that you look at the situation and you're mislabish in it. We're not talking about someone that just comes and says, that's not able to mediate. We're talking about someone who's in the situation and involved in it. So definitely Eir is B'Kelim. And nevertheless, he figures out what to do, what the Mashalech would have done. That means his selflessness was retained even while he was involved in a situation outside. Now, if you're standing in the room with the Mashalech and you do what he's saying to you, that's not a Chiddush. That's already it's a higher Bittul, but you're not in Kelim. If you know what I'm saying. I'm just giving examples. In other words, so even while you're away from the source, so to speak, or more distant from the source, and you're within a situation, a particular situation in life, you still retain selflessness.
Because you're similar.
Because you're similar. Because you still because that connection is with you. Yeah.
And that's Me'ein Amar?
That's Me'ein Amar. That would be Me'ein Amar. Dovek Ba'amar, not Dovek, I'm sorry, in Nirgish, see, it's all so subtle. Nirgish would have to be, you're not so much in Kelim anymore, that's what he's going to say. It's more like Chochmah. The example I would give would be, if you're teaching something that the Mashaleach taught, so now you're already in a domain where it's almost obvious that, you're not dealing with real Kelim, you're dealing with teaching what he taught, and you're still authentic, and you feel and remember, or you feel the source right with you, and therefore, someone hears you speaking, they hear like the Mishalech speaking. That to me would be like a nirgish.
The whole explanation about
the first one is mechaven, but it's not nirgish. Nirgish would be you hear the person speaking, and you hear like this would be what the Rebbe would be saying. You can sense it, not exactly, but and the third is obviously there's no kelim altogether. That's like you are in the muck. That would be a person who his whole life is constantly but you have to remember you're outside this. You're yearning to go back into it. You're so much driven by being reconnected to the source. It's a whole different dimension.
Then you move back to Crown Heights.
But that's not the kavanah either.
So when you say the three are connected, meaning that there are three different types of the all. So there are different types of connected to each other.
I would say each air has these three levels in it.
But here, saying that what I was thinking seems that the 3 million or no?
Yeah, well, look, it's look. The air that's mislabish or keli also has a dimension that's not mislabish. So first it begins with 3. You're right. First it begins with air inside the keli like bina, the second is Chachma, and the third is Keser. That's how it begins. But at the end, I said because I was saying what was coming later. At the end, they all are interconnected, obviously.
So is that 3 features of the Or? Or that
3 features and 3 levels. And 3 levels of Bittul. Yeah. So when he says like this, is now like this. That's the first one. Now comes number 2. This is level 2. And the Bittul in the air, because it feels its source, that's the way the air is already higher than Slapshus and Kalim. And he brings now the example for Ein Zulose now. The next few pieces here are very much connected to sources. Tanya, Kotetera, Balak, Nimona. So he says like this. In Tanya, what he says there is that Chochmah is Magish. It says from the Magid. Shemaiti b'shem b'Rabbeinu, right? That Chochmah Kechma is Magish Shahu Levade ve'en Zulose. That's Eir Chochmah. Uvur Shabitl the Hu Levade who Harizeb B'chinas HaChochmah.
Remember I told you that word why it says Shemaiti b'shem b'Rabbeinu?
Because that Gufa is.
That Gufa is.
Yeah.
What's the word?
In that Agoe, he says, I heard from my Rebbe, from the Magid. Everything that the Rebbe knew, he heard from the Magid. But in order to understand this concept, that you have to have a concept of a Rebbe. That's what it says, he gets from a Rebbe.
It's not the word, it's
a chilek from the Esber.
So he says, so the Bittul of Hu Levade.
No, if you want to understand this concept, you have to understand, you have to have a Rebbe.
Okay, so Bittul Hu Levade is the Bittul of B'chinas Chochmah. The Kameshikosa B'Sidr B'Dibra Maschum Mizmer L'Seda. That Bittul the Dasel Yen Ech Shekula Kamei Kalocha Shuzel B'Chochmah Dafka. You see, he's grounding it in sources, very strongly in sources here. Like it says in Sidr that the Bittul of Dasel Yen, we're talking about, is Ech Shekula Kamei Kalocha. Like everything compared to him is nothing. And this is a Chochmah. Bina only acknowledges it to Commissioners Barleil Perek Mem Beis. And Chochmah is already the air that's higher than Kalim. Like it says elsewhere that Kalim have 3 levels. Reish, Teich, and Seif. That's the beginning, the beginning of the Kalim, the end of the Teich, the inside of the Kalim, and the Seif, the end of the Kalim. Essentially the outer, inner, middle, and outer. Outer, middle, and inner. And in air you find there's 4 levels. So right here you see there's 1 level of air that's not in a Keli. Because there's 3 levels of Kelim. And there's a 4th level of air, the Esis Havaya Yud Kev Of. The Yud Chochmah. V'amadrega Dal the B'chinas Chochmah. Shezeu Atzilus Shabbat Atzilus. Atzilus and within Atzilus. Hainu B'chinas Ha'er Shalamayel MaKelim. Bina is the beginning of Kalim. Beginning is the beginning of Hasag. When you start to understand something, there's containers. Chochmah, remember, is only a spark. A spark doesn't have a container. A spark is not containable. A spark just senses something beyond itself. It's the beginning of the process, but it's only a spark. So Bina, like when you think of an idea, comes in words, in letters. That's Bina. That's why you comprehend it. Whereas Chochmah is still energy that's higher than Kalim. The whole union of 3 and 4 is in Drush Gimel Mini Adam. The Drush Gimel Mini Adam is what I refer to. That's an Eira Teda in Bolok and Eira Teda in Yonim. You should definitely learn it. Very, very clear map there of the whole picture.
Where? I'm sorry.
I'll send you an email. Send me an email. I'll tell you what page. It's Eira Teda in Yonim. That's the best version. And Eira Teda Bolok. Huh? It's a volume of its own called Eira Teda in Yonim. Vim came moving the Bittul at the Kula Kamei Kalacha Shuzel by Erkameshu by Etzem. So it's understood from this that this Bittul, that everything is null compared to him, which is Ein Zulase, the 2nd level. That's Er Kameshu Etzem. Kameshu Betzem. That's the way the Er is in the Etzem. They can explain not mamish the etzem yet, but this is how the air feels the etzem. The first level we spoke about energy as it manifests in containers. That's the level of bina. So there's a yesh, relatively speaking. Bina already has kelim. Bina is havaya in nikud of elikim. So it's Yud Kei Vav Kei, it's still the level of air, but it's pronounced like elikim, which is already kelim. The same drush, Gimel Minei Adam. The air is bria shebekelim nikud bria shebatzilus, and the air that manifests already in the bria of kelim, that's bria shebatzilus. So atzilus shebatzilus is chachma higher than kelim, level 2. Level 2 is that it feels its makir, and therefore it is it feels the bittul that's beyond that there's nothing but him. The first level does not feel that bittul. The first level has bittul because it's similar to the source. So how does it manifest? He says that it's subtle. The first level is that the air is subtle, not like a keli that is tangible. The second level is not just that it's subtle, like the source, but that it feels the source, and therefore it feels that nothing exists.
Don't they contradict each other in essence? Really, the second level contradict each other.
Why?
Because one is it's a quality that it has. The other one, this is das it does. One is have other things, and the is bittul. The other one is the whole thing.
Well, for all practical purposes, you want to say contradiction. I don't see a contradiction. I see them complementing each other. It's almost one leads to the next. But for practical purpose, let's say so. Bina chachma. If you talk about it purely bina chachma and keser,
if you say it
so be it but they're both three levels of bittul, 3 levels of ayin, 3 levels of air. So for now, let them be contradiction if you feel that way. It's ultimately not, because they all are essentially. Remember, they're all driven by the source. They're all connected to the source. That's why they're not really. You're just talking about what the source is doing to you. So one is not as intense as the next. In other words,
the lower you go, less.
Well, let's put it this way. Yes, if the air, the third level, the air that's completely higher than kelim, they're not in kelim, so it's not. So that's a contradiction. If you only had the highest level of bittul, you wouldn't go into kelim. Air has to have some diminishing. Let's put it this way: air inside the sun will not bring light to this world. So the air that's coming to Earth is already a lower level of air than the air that's inside the sun. But you can't call it yesh; it's still air. So it retains the personality of the source, but it's now, of course, in a diminished state. I mean, that's how you have to really understand it. Think of it like gradations. It's like bringing the source to farther places. But remember, it's part of the interface. You see, air represents the divine in the mamutza, in the interface. Keli represents us. So air is bringing the divine closer and closer to a point, and the kelim will bring the yesh closer and closer, and they will meet. So the essential meeting point where the interface happens, which is the essence of the whole Ayin Beis, is where air comes over. That's why it still has to retain personality. If air loses the selfless personality, even at the lowest level in the kelim, we're not going to have the meeting point, proper one. I mean, this is the beauty of it. The eloquence of it is that it really ultimately matches like a hand inside of a glove.
So it's not like
that's why if you learn the beginning of the hemshech,
it's not like with the picture where they don't meet. The fingers don't meet.
The fingers will meet, but they meet. But this takes a lot of work because if you don't do it properly,
for that you need Mashiach Zeiten.
No, this is not Mashiach Zeiten. You need
all the touch.
But Mashiach Zeiten is a result of all the work.
Yeah, obviously.
Because if you don't do it properly, one will overwhelm the other. Either the yesh will overwhelm the ayin, or the ayin will overwhelm the yesh. That's why it's so relevant to have Teyu and Tikkun in the dynamic. Yeah. Okay, so
100%.
Now the third level, the bittul and the ayin of the air, the bittul and the third level. That's aliv iskal. Not just that it senses its source, but that it elevates and is included in the source. This is the essence of the air that's higher than the whole union of how it manifests inside containers. And he qualifies this. Didn't we just say that that's chachma? We just said chachma is etzem air. He says no. B'chin is chachma. Shu b'chin is air shelamayel mekelim kanal zeh rakshi lamayel mislapshus b'kelim. Chachma is only that it's higher than manifesting in kelim. It's still relative to the kelim, because very simple. Chachma, the spark of Chachma will come into Bina. So Chachma and Bina are not two opposite worlds. Mashenkin, aval etzem ha'er hu shalamayla me'erech ha'kelim. Etzem ha'er, as you're going to say in a moment, Keser is completely higher than Kelim. So therefore we have the three things. So to sum up briefly, Bina, or Kelim, air inside the Kelim, is Me'in Hamor. It's similar to the source, so it has retains selflessness. Number two, it senses Margish Mekere, it feels its source. And therefore it feels nothing. It's, everything is void, everything is meaningless, ayin, compared to the source. That's Chachma, so that's how air is higher than Kelim. But it's not completely higher than Kelim. And then there's Keser, as you're going to say now, that's Keser, is the third level, which is where it's the etzem itself, and therefore it cleaves and it yearns to go into the source. And that's that. In other words, it's not just sensing there's a source; it actually is active in reaching into the source. And there, it's the etzem ha'er, relatively here to these two levels. The way the is completely beyond chachma. Chachma goes into bina. This one is not even be'erech. It's not even relative.
For purposes of interfacing, the bina is the level of the interface.
No.
Because the pshit is, you have the pshit is
Level 2 is the interface.
Level 2 is the real interface.
Exactly.
Chachma. Bina is necessary because let's put it this way: they're all in the interface. Bina is already bringing chachma to more into the yesh, if you want to put it. But remember, we're speaking now; it's still all ayin, because even bina is eir in the kelim. We're not talking yet kelim yet. Remember, this whole thing is still three levels, all in eir, except one eir is
more.
Look, bina. If bina senses chachma and chachma senses keser, you have the interface working well. That's what it comes down to. Okay, so now. Perek 2, that's 279. 280, which you learned as well. 280 is.
You finished yesterday 280?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We started 281.
Yeah. We'll go all the way into there. 280 begins with the discussion of this third level, this third level of Kesed, but he's going to go really two interpretations. I'll sum it up and then we'll learn it.
He's actually splitting it. He's splitting the third level. In Pnimis and Chetzenis.
Okay, so the third level begins with, compared to the first two being Bina and Chachma, so Keser, so there's an expression in Eitz Chaim, or Zohar, actually. Keser Elyon Iu Afagav the Iu Kadmen Tzachim Tzuchtzach.
It's all one expression.
Ukumhu, L'gabi Ilis Ha'elis. Ukumhu Kadem Ilis Ha'elis. In the beginning, he doesn't bring the full expression, but that's the expression.
Right, on purpose. On purpose, it doesn't bring. Then he brings Kadmen, and at the lower part, he brings Tzach, because he's developing the idea.
Okay, so there, the expression basically is that Keser Elyon is going to be the third level, and the proof of it is because Keser Elyon is the expression of this. Even though it is a primordial, an original energy, meaning that it's higher than Chachma, being higher than everything, Kadmen. And it's eir tzachtzim of meaning that it's a very refined eir. Ukumhu, it's darkness. Ukum means dark, black, compared to the source of all sources.
No.
So there's a source of all sources. No, this is very important. The source of all sources, for all practical purposes, is etzem. There's Keser, that's the Kadmen, higher than everything below it, but compared to the source of thoughts, it's called black, not light. That's how, not that it's diminished light, not even small light. Darkness, as if it's completely doesn't exist. So this is Achrei Tzimtzum.
This is level 3.
But this is all after the Tzimtzum. This is Eir of Atzilus. This is Keser of Atzilus here. It's rooted. Everything is rooted. You can find it all in the Tzimtzum. Remember, everything is microcosm. But if you want to really be accurate, where he is right now, he's talking Eirus and Kelim of Tikkun. That's really what he's really discussing. But everything is rooted. Okay, so he's going to explain like this now, that this ukum is a level that shows you that Kesed has no kelim at all. It's the way, why is it ukum? Because Kesed is this third level. Is the level of air that goes completely in its source, and when it's in its source, it's as if it doesn't exist. He brings a Zohar, another expression from Zohar that's very important. Lav iyu nehurin klal, something like that, right? Lav inu nehurin. There's no light there. It's light that's not light. So basically, what we're going to have now is that the three levels of bittul will go like this. The first level of er me'ein amor. The second level is ein zulase, and this third level, kesser, is efes biltecha. And efes is higher than ayin. Ayin means nothing, efes means absolutely nothing. So ayin is chachma. Chachma senses that ein zulase, there's nothing but God. And kesser senses that there's nothing, period. That's what he says. But then there's a problem. And that's why he brings a second interpretation. The problem is that this is not the essence. Kesser is still a light. That's why it says, Kesser is an air. Because it says, Kesser afal gav diyu air. So it's an air. Kadme and tzach and so, but it's still an air. So based on this, he breaks this into another level. That there's a level higher than Kesser. There's a level higher than Ukam even. And he compares it, I'm just summarizing, but then we can learn, compares it, brings from Vakocha, from his father, the Marash, that says there's two things, there's Ukam, and there's Reshad Lo Yisyad, Lo Yoda. That Ukam is darkness, and Lo Yoda is Ephes. So Ukam would be basically a deeper level in Ayin, in Ein Zulosei, and Ephes now is higher than, what's the difference between Kesser and Chetzeni Kesser?
No, but you established already that Kesser is Ephes.
No, but
you think he's going to change it? I thought he's splitting Ephes.
No, one second. So Pnimis HaKesser, which is Atik.
Right.
Which is, one second. But for all practical purpose, Lo Yada, that part.
That's Ephes, I agree.
That's Ephes. But and the lower level of Kesser
it won't be Ephes?
Is Ayin.
Why are you saying that?
He says
clearly?
I'll show you. Yeah.
Okay.
I
thought he's splitting it, so then he's changing his mind.
No, he's saying, no. He's establishing that the level of Ukam in Kesser is Ayin. You'll see, he says it beferish. Not change. It's not changing. It's two ways of interpreting this. It really comes down how much you break it down. That's what it comes down to. The bottom line is, according to this interpretation, basically we're adding a fourth level.
Yeah, that's
a fourth level of real ephes that's higher than ayin. Okay, fine. He says it beferish, by the way.
Okay.
And then he gives an example. The example is two examples he gives for this. One is shari b'tira. This is an amazing example. Shari b'tira is a candle, light of the sun. Okay, so candle, light of the sun is an interesting paradox here. They're both light. However, the candle, not only don't you see no light, you see darkness actually. If you put a candle, light of the sun, you actually see a shadow. Because it's so different light, you know.
I interpreted it, I thought it was that when you put the candle in the sunlight, because it's so light, you don't see the flame part, you just see the dark part of the candle.
You could say whatever, but it basically means the candle is creating a dark spot. And that's the ukam of Kesser. So an example in Aveda, or Aveda, more personal example, would be a student and the teacher. So the bittul of Kesser, ukam, is not that it's not light, is that in the face of a greater light, this light is non-existent. But it still exists. It still exists. One second. But in the face of that, and if that light disappears, the candle will suddenly emerge. So it's like a student that's standing in front of a great teacher. So in front of the great teacher, he's silent and completely bittul. But it doesn't mean he doesn't have wisdom. The higher level, on the other hand, is the skalus. The higher level is where even if there's absolutely nothing there, you're completely encompassed in the original light. And it's not like a candle that has its own metzias, should you take away the higher light. And he explains that that level of iskalus, I mean, this is where it gets complicated, because on one level it's chachma, it says it brings from bimana, right, from kuteteda. But on the other hand, it's not as high of a bittul, because which is a deeper bittul? For example, let's say not a candle, but let's take a small little flame, not a flame, a little piece of sunlight compared to the major sun. Which is more bittul? The sunlight compared to the sun, or the flame compared to the sun? So you could argue the flame is much less bittul, because on the contrary, it darkens the area, and it's not reflective. That take away the sun, and you have no. It still exists, that flame. Whereas the light of the sun is completely bittul. But the answer is no. A bit, because the difference when it's muhus or not the same muhus. What does that mean? It means that the flame, it's much more bittul because it's so distant. The flame reminds you how far the sun is. The sunlight is too similar. When it's very similar, it doesn't have quite the same type of, doesn't reveal the same type of ein arech, the distance. And that's what he says the differences between Keser and well, that's really the next chapter.
Like you were saying before, that in Bittul is not Shaykh Bittul, that's the greater than Neir, the Gabi Davukum. Because you're just becoming part of another, that's really his bigger existence.
I think I could also argue the other way around.
Shaga B'tira, he loses his entire form. So
no, not Shaga B'tira, doesn't lose his entire form.
Yeah.
What's that? Flame, a candle, does not lose. So it's not. It's not.
But there we're saying that the Ner Ba'avuka. What does the lashon use over here?
Ner Ba'avuka, but not Ner B'Shemesh and Ner Ba'avuka.
Ner Ba'avuka.
Ner Ba'avuka is lower than Ner B'Shemesh. Right.
Because the Shraga B'tira, the Ner Legabe the Shemesh, over there is a Bittul in the Bittul.
I could argue Bittul in both of them. As a matter of fact, you could argue more Bittul in the Ner Avuka because it completely disappears.
But it becomes now part of a whole, more of a Metzius, really.
Right, he's becoming.
Yeah, but it's more of a Metzius of Bittul.
Okay.
I don't know. I would not.
The Shraga is like a Yesh, Legabe the Shemesh. In a certain way. The Bittul Vendor's bottle, I would not necessarily distinguish between these two. They both have them. They both don't have them.
You see, but the Ner B'Shemesh goes out of
it. It's similar. You could say one adds up to very little, one doesn't matter.
I don't know what you mean.
The candle and the flame is adds up to very little because it's still the same thing, but it adds very little. And the one that doesn't matter, it's like the small chacham.
Are we trying to understand? Was there a question on the table?
No.
Or just
trying to explain why.
I wouldn't say Bittul Ventnish bottle to me is on Iskalos. Whatever is Iskalos in its source.
But that's not its source. That's the thing. The Shraga and the Tira, it's not.
Why are you trying to force Bittul and Ventnish bottle to this? It doesn't bring that. I brought that example.
No, close.
But Bittul Ventnish bottle is a stronger Bittul?
No, Bittul Ventnish bottle is not really Bittul.
He's doing his job.
It's like you said, it's not Bittul.
I don't know. I would not bring that. Bittul Ventnish bottle to me is
it's not goonish.
Exactly. But here it's garnish.
Look, you could apply it, you could try to apply it, but I would think that Bittul Ventnish bottle is just the general personality of light.
Name of the company.
And the Bittul of light is constantly looking to go into its source. As it constantly looks to go into its source, it doesn't become bottle because that's what its personality is.
So why do we call it black?
To say that a candle has it more than a candle in the sun has it more than that, not necessarily. I would say, remember, you're talking these examples. Let's talk the real source of it. Eir hakol ba'atzmusei, the energy that's I'm talking about Eir hakol. That's Bittul Ventnish bottle. That's really where it is.
Yeah, but
so to apply it to candle,
the air which is not kol, which wants to be nichol. That's what he's talking about.
But Neir doesn't want to be nichol in the sun.
What?
The Neir doesn't want to be nichol in the sun. It's two different types of light.
That moshel can be used if he doesn't want to be nichol.
Exactly. So,
but he's using it as a moshel to the third level that wants to be nichol.
This takes a broom.
So that's a real Bittul, it's stronger Bittul, because he's not making his mitzvah stronger, he's becoming a Galson like Oysam.
So what's your point? I don't really understand what you're saying. He said it. He says it here clearly. The reason it's an advantage is because it's not the same mahus. So it senses the distance.
Why is there stronger Bittul?
Because it senses distance. It says it clearly. Why? What's missing? I don't understand what's missing. Because he senses something so beyond.
Anything is already...
He says, when you do it, the whole bittul gabe davar she'ein musa is bittul yesod gadol.
Why?
So what's your answer?
My answer is because here, look at what he says here. Mikol kamarei mehus eish, v'rakshin is batel memitziusi harishon. So in other words, it wasn't a strong bittul because he's still going into eish. So like you were saying before, it's bittul and bittul. Bittul and bittul is not real bittul.
No, that's not what I said. Bittul and bittul is not real bittul. I said as an advantage, not as a weakness.
It's an advantage, but it's in a way a weakness because it's not really bittul. Because Adarabah, his mitzvah is becoming stronger.
No. What I said was absolutely only advantage. No, not one negative about it. No. You're using language. That's what I'm disturbed by because what bittul is talking is only as an advantage. There's no weakness in that at all. I would not use that at all in this context here. It's confusing matters. confusing matters. You could explain here one thing. He says, forget about what I said.
Forget about that line. Forget about that line. But in the age, forget without that line. In the age, he's becoming kind of more of his existence because he's becoming.
He says it at the end of Fedish. She'ein zeh shu b'skalas mamas ki ma shechef zu this. Yeah, he says it specifically. I agree. But does he say what you said before? 1 second. You know what? Look. What? I would learn it inside if you don't mind.
Where we're learning inside?
Reish Pei.
Yeah, that's where you started.
Shraga B'tira and the Shemesh, the difference between the two is that by the candlelight, it goes. The sun is fusion. The sun is a different kind of light than the candlelight, and the candle is in constant Bittul. It's a bigger Bittul. It's Hetzachon Aggressive Bittul. Not anything that a spark that goes into a fire. It's being nichel in becoming even more of a messias. It's going into its same was. So you say the bigger Bittul is by the candle. Because it's a different thing in Gansen. It's not in the same playing field. It's a different ballpark.
Right. I think it's self-understood. What is there something? Is there a problem with that?
No, because you would think on the surface, when you see bigger Bittul, you would think that
you lose
lost.
Identity.
You lose your identity in the flame. You're gone. You know that's the chayra out on the surface. That would seem like a bigger Bittul, as opposed to a candle in the sun.
I'm going to read this. I'll read this quickly.
So why is it called ukam? Why is it dark? Why is the candle considered dark in front of the sun? Why
physically or spiritually?
No, in spirit.
Physically,
conceptually, why are we calling it darkness? It's maybe less light. Why are we calling it darkness?
Well, first of all, you see it that way. If you go outside in the sunlight and light a candle, you'll see less light in the candle. It'll do exact opposite what a candle does. A candle in a dark room will illuminate. Here, the candle will actually, you'll see a shadow. The bright, it'll be a contrast. It won't melt in. You'll actually see a dark spot. As a matter of fact, if the candle's big enough, you won't even see the sun. It can block out the sun. It won't block it out like it's a dark day.
Right.
But that area where the candle is, because that's what happens. And now, in the spiritual level, it's very clear why. It's very clear why, because compared to the brightness of the source, Keser is darkness. That's what it means. It's
we got to try that.
It's a very simple. I mean, he also gives the example of the teacher and the student. If a brilliant teacher is speaking and teaching, and then someone who's, let's say, a good student is going to be bottled completely. But let's say that second student starts speaking. From the other perspective, they'll see darkness. They won't see light because they'll be blind. Because they'll see the inferiority. That's what they'll say.
Well, the fact that the teacher leaves the room and the student stays there, that's already shows that the student's like the sun, like the candle, the sun leaving the candle.
No, not but that.
No, he's saying
in the presence of the teacher.
It's, in front of him.
Yeah,
right. Like if you're. I can't say about myself so much.
Which one are you?
Now, when I speak, you got it.
I would read it. I know you learned, but let's read it. Let me read it. V'yesh leimer, that this third level is in Keser Elyon, Afagav. In other words, Afagav that it's air, so on. Ukum hu kadem.
This is something.
I already read it. I said it already. If you were listening, before.
I wasn't listening. I was reading.
Yeah. Keser Elyon, Afagav the ihu air kadmen. Tzach mit suchzich.
No, tzach mit suchzich. And Lashon is that Lashon is Ertzach, Mitzvach, and then after he says,
I beg to differ, but and I happen to know it by heart, so it's not Kadman. You know what? Why don't you look it up?
I looked
see
it up.
Which one's the candle?
Ertzach, Mitzvach, and then he says after.
Is it relevant?
It is relevant because it's two types of iron.
Okay. Ukum hu kadem ilu. So Pirish ukum hu. So it's dark compared to the source of all sources. Pirish ukum hu. The meaning of ukum, darkness, hu lashon shachrus, is darkness. The meaning of shachrus. By the way, when you say shachar, the morning, People don't realize this. You say Alois HaShachar.
The intensity of the dark.
One second. Alois HaShachar, the Zohar asks, why is it Alois HaShachar? Elevating of the... Alois HaShachar means elevating of the morning. He says it should have been the descending of the morning. Yididus HaShachar. Or Alois HaLaila. And he answers because Shachar doesn't mean morning. Shachar means darkness. It's the rising of the darkness is Alois, is leaving as the morning breaks. So Shachar refers to, he speaks about it by the Zohar about Yaakov when he fights with the angel. So it says Ad Aleis HaShachar there. So he says Aleis HaShachar because the darkness of the night, which is when the angel had power, Esau's angel, leaves, and that's when the morning breaks. So Shachar does not mean morning. Shachar means actually dark. Aleis HaShachar. When the darkness is Aleis, is leaving. So
That's a vanity.
that's not in any form of gili because of the bittul that Kesed has. It explains. Remember, we spoke the third level of bittul is that it desires to be encompassed, included in the source. So because it wants to be included in the source, it wants to be included in Atzmus, which is the Yesh Amiti, which is the opposite of his galus. When the Etzem wants to create, so he manifests into energy and then into creation. But here, Kesed feels and senses, and its bittul is to be included in the source before and opposite of coming down and manifesting. And therefore, it causes it to be ukam. So we see from this that the third level of Eir, that's kol b'moyer, meaning that not just that it's similar to the source, not just that it senses it, but it elevates into it, is the level of Kesed ukam. For Neidim HaBaal Shem Tov, it's known from the Baal Shem Tov, Pirush Srofim Emdim Amalei. Baal Shem Tov Srofim Emdim, meaning the Srofim, the angels that are called like the fiery angels of Bria, are Emdim Amalei, they stand above him. What is Mamalei? Because they want to, and they're burning with desire, and want to be included in the Ein Sof, that means their yearning is so deep to go into their source, it's considered as if they're standing above him. And this is, of course, where the source where the Rabbi Shem Tov says that this is the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov brings a raya from Sofim Emdim Amalei, and that in truth.
Are we talking about the first level of Kesed?
We're only talking about we never talked about two levels of Kesed.
We haven't got it yet.
No.
Okay.
Well, but everywhere you say, not just they're just saying not just Serafim, in anything, even a person, the place you want to be is considered as if you're completely there. Why? Because Ratzon has the power to draw all of you, all your energy, all your faculties to it. So bottom line is, when you want something and desire it, that brings you there. So therefore, Kesed, since it desires to be in the source, the third level of Eir, that's Nichlo, not just its senses, but it wants to go there, it's as if it's there, and that's why Ukamhu. The Kesed, the same thing is with the darkness of Kesed, because it wants to, desires to be included in the Yesh Amiti, in the essence of reality, of the essence of the Moed, of the source of light. It's considered as if it's there, as if it's encompassed with l'chein ukamhu, and that's why it's dark. Like the light of the sun that's inside the sun, which has absolutely no light of its own there. It's completely controlled by the sun. And this is a chiddush. That's why he says, this is the way his father, the Marash, says it in Maimar V'ulam Tafresh Lamadal. He's bringing that because clearly that was like additional. To say it's like the sun, the sunlight within the sun, is like, seems like to be something that doesn't say elsewhere.
Possible, I'm just saying, he's saying it's the reason it took him is because it wants to be nichel so much, and it's like it's there already. It sort of left its space and went in, and therefore there's a black hole left where it was. That's why.
No, I wouldn't say that at all.
That's how it sounds.
I would say no. I would say where it is right now, it's ukum. It's completely. Look, light outside of the sun may not be as intense. It's definitely not as intense as the sun, but it has some substance. Best proof of it is this: if the sun were closer to Earth, the Earth would burn up.
Yeah.
So the sunlight is not, precisely because it's not the sun, so it's diminished light. As it travels, it gets more and more diminished. But one thing it has is that it can bring light to this earth and give life to us. If the sun were here, we would have no life. So it plays a function like that. But the light itself doesn't want to be outside of its source. It wants to constantly go back into the source. This third dimension. It wants to go back to its source. When it goes into its source, it's as intense as the sun is, and it doesn't care to be light. It doesn't need this diminished dimension. It's only for us that has value. In the source, the light has no problem not being nothing. I know it's hard to imagine someone should be like that, but the light has that type of personality. And I'm saying that's its personality. So therefore, when it's there, so what it was outside of the sun is ukam, l'gabi ilus olus, not outside of the sun. That this type of light that we see from sunlight right here, put that inside the sun, that's ukam. It's not, sunlight doesn't need it. On the contrary, it's inferior to sunlight. It's less than it's bottle. It's like a shag material, as I'm going to say later, but it's completely it's darkness actually. You know, if you ask somebody what does light outside the sun look like inside the sun, let's say it's ukamhu. In this case, it's what he says. It's not light, or it's even further. It's darkness even. The point here, we're not trying to emphasize that it's dark. We're trying to emphasize that it's constant, not tefus mokum. It's so not relevant that it's unnecessary.
So why did you just say that? Why didn't you call this whole thing of ukam?
What do you mean?
Just say it's nothing.
That's what ukam means. He said that ukam. Bittul.
So is the difference between the candle and the sunlight the same? The difference between the sunlight and the sunlight?
No, but it is, because you know something. If you now look from the perspective of the sunlight, and that type of light is somewhat of a shade. It is a shade. It is a dark spot.
So you're saying that the difference?
Maybe that's where the dark spots in the sun are.
That's what is the difference between the sunlight and the candle the same difference as the sun and the sunlight?
No, he says absolutely not.
Why? You say that it's the same, just like the sunlight in the sun.
Well, first of all, we're not talking about candles here. There's no candle discussion.
No, but it's only sunlight. Ukam is calling before.
Sunlight. He's talking sunlight here. No,
before we call the candle ukam.
No, there's no. That's later. We're not there yet. We'll get there.
But we did it before. We just said it before.
I said, but it's not in this discussion.
We don't know that yet. We don't know that yet about that.
No. It's a different. But even if you do know it, it's not this. It's a different level. We're not talking about that level.
Same level. It's a different level.
Is this like
the same type
thing as the sunlight?
Sunlight.
Or gvul at that point?
There's no gvul and bli gvul. He's not talking about gvul and bli gvul. He's talking about eir and moir now, source and light. I wouldn't look. You know, the Rebbe Rashab is going to spell it all out when he wants to spell it out. He's not there yet. He's not talking about gvul and bli gvul. The imkain. Okay, so now, according to this, then imkain zel kumei bittul de'efeshel amayel ma bittul da'ayin. So this is the third level. So according to if that's the case, this is the bittul of efes that's higher than ayin. That bittul ayin, the second level we talked about, that bittul da'ayin, which is chachma, who kumei sha'er b'chinas is gala shenirgish by eich she'en zul asay mukom makom b'chinas er. The bittul of ayin is level 2, where chachma, the oyer, the energy feels. Senses, shenigr, it feels how Ein lost, like there's nothing else but the sun, nothing else but the source. But nevertheless, it's still a level of light there. There's light. Light that senses that there's nothing but the source. As opposed to level 1, that doesn't sense that yet, that just is similar to the source. In other words, if you interviewed, let's say, sunlight, you'd have 3 different responses depending on what level of light you're speaking to. If you're speaking to the lowest level, it will tell you, I don't know anything, all I know is I'm here to bring sunlight here to this earth, and I'm similar to it. I'm bringing light, the sun has light, I'm bringing this light to earth. Level 2 would say, I can tell you something about the sun, I sense it. Because I sense it, I'm less, let's put it this way, it's less significant to me where I'm going, it's more important where I'm coming from. You could think like that. That would be the second level. And the sense is nothing, just know this, don't think you're so important on earth, the only thing that exists is the source. Nothing but the source, that's level 2. Very higher level. The first one could just tell you I'm light, I don't have any substance because my source doesn't have substance. The second one actually says there's nothing but the source. It's a much deeper bit. The first one doesn't say that. The first one says I'm bottle, but I can't tell you that everything is bottle compared to the source. And the third one, the third level is Ephes, that says there's not even, I don't even exist. I don't want to exist. Since I don't want to, as if I don't. As he says, so it's saying Shalada. It's saying says Efes. This is the third. Efes Zulose, he says in the Matam. Efes Belode, whatever. Who beginners Bittul scholars b'mkeri. Lav dafka, the correction they're making is correct. Even though the Tefillah says Efes Belode, but it could be once they compare because Ayin and Efes in Zulose Gufa. Ayin Zulose, Efes Zulose. Maybe.
Yeah, I didn't see what's the...
No, because the Lashon of the Tefillah is Efes Belode.
Okay.
So Efes who beginners scholars b'mkeri she'ein beginners erklal. The Lav inu nehurim. Another expression from Zayah. So that's third level. Level 2 cannot say I'm not light. I am light, but I don't take myself seriously. And I don't take anything else seriously. The only thing that matters is the source. But there is light. Befedish light. There's Chochmah. Chochmah is not Ayin, Chochmah is the beginning of Bina. The third level of light says, I don't exist. I want to be my source. And when you want to be Mamala, you're there. And there, I'm non-existent. Nothing exists. Only the source. There's not. You can't even call it light. It's the third level of Bittul, of Ayin. Well, the Fizeh, HaBittul, the Hulavade, Hu, VaBittul, Daliv is called, and Beze in Yonim, the Ayin ve'efes. According to this, level 2 of, no. According to this, the Bittul of Hulavade is Chochmah, is the second level, VaBittul, Daliv is called, is the third level. One is Ayin, one is Efes. So you have level 1, which doesn't really have a name.
One is Chochmah, one is Kesser.
No, Bina, Chochmah, Kesser. So the first one doesn't have really a name. They're all Ayin. But it's the low. There's Ayin, Ein Zulase, and Efes right now. And Efes is Kesser, the Ukam. It's not even any form of light. Now he's going to, of course, come and say, when you really start studying it, you see there's a fourth level, and you can't just say what he just said here. You can't just say that Ukam is Efes, basically. He's going to make Efes something deeper than Ukam. Omnom yesh l'dag b'masha emer. Omnom, however, you have to be medagdik when you precise about the language. The language in Zayah, Kesser Afagad Yu Er Kadmin. The Lashon there is Er Kadmin. Ukum Hu. So it's an Er.
You notice before he didn't bring Er Kadmin, just Chulu, because it wasn't so important. Now it's important to bring it out.
Ukum Hu. Hari the Kesser Gam Ken B'chinas Er. We just said Lavil Inu Noheden, that it's like in the source where there's no light. Here the Fedish says it's a light. And the Pardes explains, I Mashikosa B'Pardes Shara Tzachtzach is paid Gimel. Explains the three languages in the Zayah, three terms. It's Eir Kadmen, Tzach, Umutzuchzach, Eir Kadmen, Tzach, Umutzuchzach, B'chinas Kachab Shebekesser. It's Kesser Chochem Bina Shebekesser, just to make the interface even more interesting. So you have here, the three levels are all within Kesser, and they're all Eir. So the Eir Kadmen, Eir Tzach, Umutzuchzach. No, it's the Kesser Shebekesser, Chochmah Shebekesser, and Bina Shebekesser are all Ukam Hu.
They're all Eir and they're all Ukam.
Yeah, right. So
even Kesser also.
But you have the Shilas, the Lav Alurin, so it's the
Im Kain Eich Nemesh HaKesru B'chinas Efes Mamish Kain Lav In Nehurin. So Shari Nikra B'Shemer. So how could you say that Keser is the level of Efes Mamish, which is complete nothingness, and say like there's no energy when you just say it's an Ev? Yeshleim Al Pi Mashakosum B'Drush V'Kocha Reish Lamed Zayin Seif Perek Chov Gimel. Yeshleim Al Pi, what the Rebbe Marash says in V'Kocha Reish Lamed Zayin, end of chapter 23. Ahefes Ben Ukam L'Lo Yoda. Reishad Leis. So Ukam, so Kesser has two elements. There's Reishad Leis Yoda, basically is more of Atik, and there's Ukam Hu L'Gabe Kodem L'Il Solo. So he says the Ukam B'chinas Bittul Levad, Shun is Battle L'Fnei Il Se'os. Ukam is just regular Bittul. It's Bittul alone. It's completely nullified compared to the source. Aval Lo Yoda She'ein B'chinas Hergish Klal Gam Ba'atzmei. Lo Yoda means that even himself doesn't have any feeling of self. The meaning that Ukam, after all, is not Efes because Ukam does feel something of its own, but it's Ukam, it's completely nullified from the source.
So that's higher than Atik or that's Atik?
I never heard there's anything higher than Atik. It says in Yitzchak there's nothing higher than Atik.
Allah, what do you mean? That's not...
That is Atik.
Is Atik, it says clearly.
Anyway, one second. Let's see. I told you, if you want to learn this really effectively, more than Shai Yichud, learn Drush Gimel Minei Adam from the Tzemach Tzedek. It's a minor from the Alter Rebbe that really lays out the whole map.
Where is it? In
Bolok and in Yonim.
Shmukla, it says clearly, Venus of Milgav, B'chinas Primius HaKeser, B'chinas Atik, HaNikra Radlo.
Yeah, Yeah, that's Pashut. Atik is Atik.
Attic, but it's
But there's a lot of levels of Atik.
In Attic, there's
But why is this?
levels.
In everything there's different levels.
Wow.
Here, Atik and Adla are more or less the same. Usually, Atik and Adla. Atik has Primis Atik, Chetzenis Atik. Atik has Esospheres in Atik.
Right, that's lower. I'm asking, is that lower? Is that lower than Adla, right? There's Esser Spheres. That means
Depends which level of Atik is. Atik is like saying Keser. It's a whole level. Atik is a parchut. Atik is a whole level. Atik has Atik Sheba Atik, has Chochm has Keser, has Arik Sheba Atik, has talking about Primis Atik, one level. Radla is the highest level, one of the highest levels, not the highest, but one of the higher levels. They should lay said that the Gamba Atzman in Radla itself. In Radla itself, there are 4 levels. If you want to really break it down.
In Radla.
But that's not here. It's other Maimonides.
Okay, I just want to understand the makeup of it.
That's the highest level.
It's the highest, for all practical purposes here, it's the highest. It's not going into detail. Look, why don't you ask me if it's Primis Atik or Chetzenius Atik? He's not going into it here. That's not discussing it. Everything, rest assured, everything has more levels than you think it has. So whatever level you think it is always more. That you can know for sure.
Wait, till now we've been saying that Chachmas Hard Min, in other words, the first level is Heder Mitzias, right? And higher than that is when you feel yourself but you're still bottom, right? Nirgush, when you're nirgush but you're still bottle, that's a higher level than not feeling yourself at all. Yeah? Over here he's saying the higher level of Loyada is a
He didn't finish. He didn't finish what he's saying. He's going to answer all this. This is all going to be clear. He's going to distinguish between the two. What he just said was what it says in the Kocha. That Ukam is Bittul, and Loyada, that there's no at all sense of self. Obviously, Ukam's Bittul is higher than the Bittul of Chochmah. Now he's going to explain why. Now he's going to explain. To explain this, he says like this. If you look at this, he says first Inyan, then he says Ubira Inyan. Here's first the Inyan. The Inyan is that in Tikkun Ezer it says the following: Ein Ein Sof Milagav, Ein Ein Sof is on the inside, Kisrei Lo Milabar, Kesser is on the outside. So if you think of it like a wall, Ein Ein Sof is on this side of the curtain, Kisrei Lo, the higher Kesser is on this outside of the curtain. Explaining what does that mean? The B'chinas Kesser, the B'chinas Chetzenis HaKesser. That's referring to Chetzenis HaKesser's Kisrei Lo on the outside. The Bezehu Bittul the Ukam. That's the Bittul of Ukam. Dark Hashem is battle kodem il seil. There's battle compared to the source. Ein Ein Sof milagav b'chinas primis hakesser b'chinas atik anikad adlah shu b'chinas lo yada. And Ein Ein Sof milagav means in this case primis hakesser. So it's primis hakesser here. That primis hakesser, which is atik adlah lo yada, the level of lo yada, doesn't know. Hainu she'enam hu shidu murgish ba'atzmei klal. It says, I don't know. It means that he doesn't have any sense of self, that I know and sense something by himself, that I know or I feel, sense anything. And now we be the Inyan. That's the Inyan. The Be the Inyan is, the explanation is, in a Bittul the Bittul of Ukam Hurak Hedet Tfisas Mokum. Ukam means that it's just not Tefis Mokum, it's, how do we translate that in English? Hedet Tfisas Mokum. It doesn't sense any value of itself where it is right now. The point being is not that it doesn't exist. Remember, that's what he says. That's the difference between it doesn't have any head.
It exists as a void.
Ukam. It exists. It doesn't feel that it has any value. That's what it means. Ain't physis mokum. It doesn't have value. It does not. Like a flame, in the middle of the day. Sunlight, Mayahana, what benefit does it have? The betake of zichus eir hashemesh, the intensity of the radiating sunlight, ain't eiraner male klal. The flame, the light of a flame doesn't add any benefit. Adra b'nechshachere. On the contrary, it darkens the light, as we said, that the candle darkens that area. U'makom mokum zeh raksha eina b'b'chinas eir hamer av'harud mitzias eir akapanim. This just means it's not Tefes Mokum. It just means it's not a radiating light. But you can't say it doesn't exist. You can't say there's nothing there. You can't say there's no light. It's still a measure of light. It is light. Because the entire Metzius of light didn't disappear completely. There is a Metzius, there is an existence of light here, of a flame, of a candle. The only thing is it's not radiating because of the sun. So you can't say it's non-existent. You could just say it has no value. Let's put it this way. It's basically the separating between the object and its function. Its functionality has no purpose, but its being an object is there. So you could say like this: in a dark room, a candle has both its object is there and has functionality. It's bringing light into the room. When suddenly the sun is there, the object of the flame remains. It didn't disappear, but its functionality has no value, has no purpose. On the contrary, it can only be a contradiction. So that's the bittul of ukam. The bittul hazeh rak bispashtus levad. Also, did I skip a line? Okay. The bittul hazeh, now he's explaining it even deeper. That means this bittul is only in its functionality, only in its ispashtus, only it's an extension. Loi by etzem, not in the etzem thing. The etzem thing exists. It's a flame. It hasn't become less of a flame. It's not less of a yesh in any way. But right now, it's in the presence of greatness. It's in presence of something that it's extension of itself.
The sun is up. The sun is up.
Now you should bring in. And what about those people that even in the sunlight, it
means nothing.
Right. No, but they
they don't know that.
They don't know that.
That's what he's saying.
So we're now getting into character.
No, I'm talking about. No.
Saying we have one. Like they say when the Tsar was thrown over, the Chassidim cried because they lost the Muslim. So we need certain people. We need certain people. Certain people are Muslim at least. It's like that's what I think. Rabbi Shmuel tells somebody who's some type of guy that's like he says, I don't know about if you have any value, but one thing for sure, you're a Muslim for a certain madri.
That's phenomenal.
So everyone has a purpose.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, so it's pashtus. L'chein bistalik, and here's the proof. Bistalik eir hashemesh. If it was really batel mitzias, then when the sun disappears, it should be gone. Or l'chein bistalik Hashem, when the sunlight is removed, leaves kashashemesh shekeya, when the sun sets. Meir oz eraner, the flame is right there, still dancing. Because not just that now it returned to being a mitzias. Even when the sun was shining, it was also a mitzias. It never disappeared. Even when the sun was shining, kim shem is batlis pashtus levad. The only thing that it was, its expression, its extension, its expression was this battle was nullified. Now is the example that he uses with the teacher and student. The example is of a smaller person being battle with someone that's greater. Doesn't feel any value in front of this person. Doesn't feel not just any value. Doesn't feel like doesn't feel important. Like a wise person will not speak in front of someone that's greater than him. Because of the bittul, he's not going to express himself. He's not going to extend himself or express himself in front of someone that is superior to him in intelligence. But it doesn't mean he's not misbattle the etzemuchus. The essence of who he is not misbattle. He's quiet. The dibur is pashtus. That's the expression. The chacham is not going to speak in front of someone who's superior, greater than he is.
But he's there.
But he's there. Dibur is his pashtus. He's not going to speak. Will he think? Is the question. Okay, that's also levels. Yeah. Some people think, and some people even won't think. They'll just listen. Some, as the Rabbi said, some people sleep with their eyes closed, and most people sleep with their eyes open.
Oh.
That's something. Yeah. That means a bittul that's ispashtus levad and not the essence of the thing. That person, that's the smaller person, is still a chacham, is still a chacham. a wise person. You can't call him he's not a wise person. As a matter of fact, if he was with people who were lesser than him, he would be the relatively the same presence. Except his wisdom is not tefes mokim, is valueless. I'm looking for a word for tefes mokim. It's also nishtavot in English. They don't have a thing of tefes mokim. Everybody has a tefes mokim. Huh?
Insignificant?
Insignificant, yeah. That could be. Yeah. Compared to the greater chach. The head of tefes mokim bittul be'etzem mahus. He's just qualifying. This also, the bittul of insignificance is also a bittul of etzem mahus. It's not just external. It's not superficial. It also affects etzem mahus. However, once again, the hariyam is battled called kach ad she'ein tefes mokim ba'atzmei klal. Because this bittul is not as superficial. When you're in the presence of that greatness, it's not like some type of just lip service, external charade or external type of insignificance. You don't feel like anything. You really don't feel like you have any value, any significance in that presence. You don't feel you're b'chal even a chacham when you see such wisdom. In Yiddish, he completely loses himself. That's not an external thing. That's etzem mahus. Nevertheless, you can't call that a bittul be'etzem mahus mamish. You can't say that the whole person is non-existent. Because he's still a chacham. So in other words, it goes like this. What he added here was that your expression is definitely bittul, definitely insignificant, but it's insignificant in a real way. In other words, the expression is completely bittul, but you, the being, still exists. So he's just making it deeper, and the bittul is a fundamental bittul, but you still exist, and then when that chacham leaves, like when the sun leaves, this chacham remains standing. I'm sorry, like I said before. That's why someone smaller than this chacham who's bittul to the greater chacham, he is tefes makim. He's very significant. He is significant. Shu chacham legabe, v'gam hariu mashpiyalei. So this chacham, who right now stands completely lost in front of the bigger chacham, it exists, and someone that's smaller than him will consider him significant and will receive from him, and he will transmit to him. So this goes back now to Keser. This is Keser Elyon.
Here he brings Ertzach, not a Kadmon.
Even though it's an Ertzach, it's a refined light.
Yeah.
Cool. Maybe because it's a chacham, so it's refined. It's not just a kadmon. It's definitely eir. Like in the mashal, like a chacham. It's a neir. In the mashal of neir or a chacham, it's an eir kapanim. But compared to the source of all sources, that's
the answer.
It's empty. It's
the answer is compared to what?
It's all relative,
right? Why are you laughing?
I wish you said it that simple.
Well, that's the answer. He asked the question.
And now he's saying this is also b'chinas habittul de kala chashiv. So he's saying, comparing this is similar to the second bittul of Ayin. Is this still a bittul of kala chashiv? Nothing that's
similar to number 2, even though it's number 1.
Shurak kala v'lei b'chinas bittul mitzias mamash. It's as if kala. It's as if nothing exists, but it's not complete bittul mitzias mamash. However, lo yada, the primis hakeser is complete bittul mitzias mamash. But he's continuing now, still talking about this bittul of. So here we talked ukam here. In other words, he explained now not like the initial explanation. Initial explanation ukam was is completely as if there's no light. Now he's saying there's light, but the expression of light is ukam. Basically, the chiddush is the expression of the light as opposed to the essence of the light in this third level. So the third level has these two. Okay.
Why can't you say it's a herzachon? He feels that he has to be dubbed with kol nichol mamar. So it's already someone. He's feeling already. It's already on the tzis of something, and therefore it's not complete.
Because there's the fourth level also feels this scholars.
Allah doesn't feel nothing. Doesn't even know it exists.
Well, let's go to it. He didn't get back to that yet. He's going to get back to it. You're going to see in the next perek, he's going to say the real difference in Bittul is whether you feel, like you could say you're bottled to the etzem, but with the etzem you exist, and the second level is even with the etzem you don't exist. That's going to be the distinction that you just said.
I think Radlo is going to be a scholar.
Radlo is
going to be a scholar.
But this is also a scholar.
This is also a scholar. Yes, this has both. Ketzenis and Pneumius. The Pneumius will be scholars and the Ketzenis will be Dveikus.
Exactly.
Dveikus, Klei Choshev.
So where did you actually reach?
No, we went to started a Spealef already.
For start, but not deep inside it.
No, beginning. Beginning of Spealef. You see now again, he says when he talks about the second one, it says Bittul mitzad Dveikus Minkere, Leibkinas is Kalos Mamash.
Okay. Bittul, and this Bittul mitzad Dveikus B'Mikere, but this Dveikus he means. But it's higher than the Dveikus of Chachma, for sure.
It's not gleich. Und Mikol Mekar is because Bittul Gadol, yes, and Bittul Chachma. It says it right after. The whole Chiddush of this Oz is that it's splitting it.
Yeah. Bittul mitzad Dveikus B'Mikere, it's the Dveikus in the source. Leibkinas is Kalos Mamash. So in the first Pirush, it was the Kalos Mamash, Ukam. Remember, when we're talking three levels, basically one was Me'ain, similar to the source, feels the source, and it's Kalos in the source. Here he's talking that it's Dveikus in the source, third level, but it's not Kalos Mamash. Remember, interestingly, he also says, even in the beginning when he said it's Ukam, he also said it wants to be in the source, and that's why it's considered as if it's in the source.
Yeah.
So right there, you can see
it's in between Dveikus and Iskalos. It's like
Yeah. By the way, the Dvush Gimel Mini Adam is also a beer of Mimana. In the beer of Miman and Bolok, nevertheless, even the Chetzein Sakeser, even Ukamhu is higher than the Bittul of Chachma.
So even though it has the same type of Bittul, but it's still higher.
Well, because it's Forte Skal. He's going to say why.
No, because it's Fort Klei Choshev. They're both Klei Choshev, but one is higher.
No, they're both Klei Choshev. No, because it's Fort Skalus to some extent.
Okay,
let's see. Let's see. He's going to explain.
Yeah.
Explains elsewhere that the bittul of the flame of the candle in the sun is a greater bittul than the bittul of iskalus of a flame in the
this confuses.
I know. But it confuses. But at the same time, what he's trying to say is that chachma is a iskalus of ner ba'avukah. That's what he's trying to say.
Okay, I hear you. Good.
So there's two types of Hiskalos. So in other words, Hiskalos of Primis HaKeser is Lo Yoda, completely doesn't feel. Then there's like a lower Hiskalos.
The lower also has
Neir is still Neir and Avuka. And then there's Haneir feels the sun. Good. So Keser feels the sun, Chacham doesn't feel the sun. That's, you see what he just said? Yeah, it's unbelievable. In other words, you have the essence. The essence is only the lowest level of light. Is only similar to the essence. That's it. The second level of light senses the essence. The third level of light wants to be in the essence. In the third level, we determine now there's two. There's mamish, the one lo yoda, which is, let's for argument's sake, is all the way in. There's not even light there. The lower keser, the ukam, is light, but it's not tefus makom. So it's like the flame in the sunlight. Chachma is the second level, is a flame inside of an avuka. It's not sunlight. It's not in the essence. It doesn't sense the essence. It's not wanting to go into the essence. It still stays within avuka. So it has a very deep bittul, but it's not that type of. It doesn't feel other muhus. That's what he's going to say now. So he says like this. That bittul b'shag hazivit. Why is it a higher bittul? The shag b'tir has a bittul l'gabi dovish ene b'muhus and klal. Because by the flame, it's true. The flame is still there, but it's in the presence of real greatness, sunlight. And sunlight is a completely different muhus. And ve'ene me'erke klal. It's completely not in the same level. It's not two chachamim that are close and one is brighter than the other. Completely different level. A flame inside of a what do we call
fire,
it? Inside of a torch. Flame inside of a torch. Candle inside of a torch.
Bonfire.
Yeah. Has the same mahus. They're both fire. They're both eish. They're both a flame. Rak shavuku er gadol b'yesed. V'yadua the chol bittul legabe dover she'ein mahusik klal bittul yesed gadol. And it's known that every bittul, that's a rule. Did you underline that? That every bittul that's a gabe dover, it's not mahus is bittul yesed gadol. It's a deeper bittul. I'll just give you an example. The Evan Ezra writes in this last week's Pasha why Moshe had to grow up in Pari's home. So here's two reasons. One is, he says, because if he was one of them, they wouldn't have fear, they wouldn't have awe of him. He had to be different. He had to come from a different place completely.
The Jews.
Moshe.
You know what I'm saying? The Jews wouldn't have.
Yeah, because he would have been Chavralap, he'd been one of our guys. You know, based on the stamps and so on. And that's what he says. So in other words, the idea that someone growing up completely different, that creates a different type of bittul.
That's what they have when they went to yeshiva.
I just thought the same thing.
Yeah, it doesn't have any chaveruses.
Could you imagine the idiot had gesagt,
Right. Okay. So the point is, so the truth is like there's some people.
What's the second reason? That's
the
why
second reason he gives is that he shouldn't have the mentality of avdus. He shouldn't have the mentality of a leader. He should have the mentality of a leader.
Shouldn't have the mentality of avdus. Of a slave.
He says Tomim Yod Hashem. He says the secrets of Hashem we don't know, but maybe these are two reasons. That's what he says. The Parsha. Interesting, yeah. So bottom line is, it's like, you know the story where they go, look, the Tsar's soldiers are looking for soldiers that are hiding from the army. So they go into a house and two Jews are hiding behind the curtain. They open up, it's 90-year-old Jews. They say, what are you doing? What are you hiding? He says, and generals you don't need. Instead, here everybody's generals. We see all generals. So the truth is, a lot of people like to hang around people that are like themselves. But for them, it's okay, a little better than me. But someone that's in ganze Mechus Acher, that bittul, you know. So here what you have is a flame hanging around with a torch. We're in the same level, good, I'm fine. But I'm not completely not tefus money. Here, the fact that it's completely different Mechus. So a flame with a torch.
The expression of the flame, really, because if you think about it, the Etzem thing is still there.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Whereas the expression of the flame in the Avuka, you could say we're still, same team or something. Yeah, we're in the same club. So it's Godel Yesod. No, because I'll tell you why. Also, a flame, interesting, a flame and a torch adds to the torch. A flame to a sun is not going to add anything. Right. Forget about dark. It doesn't add anything. Right. It doesn't make the sunlight brighter. Here you could say, hey, 1 second, I'm also a partner in this. I'm also a chavruza. Yeah. If you do the chobitul, that's the thing. The neir navuka is a bittul be'etzem. So even though the flame within the sun is only a bittul of expression, but neir bavuka b'chinas iskalis, and neir bavuka is completely included because but kol malkim hariu b'mahus eish, for action is batman mitzusi hadishin.
So the bittul is bigger in expression in one level, and the bittul is bigger in mitzvahs in another one. That's all. There's two types of bittul.
But 1 second, but he's saying, but the bittul of iskalis, of the flame in the torch, is a mahus eish. It's still in the mahus of eish. In Aish, in the family of flame, in my family, I'm bottled. But I'm not going to be bottled to another level completely. Understand? That's what it means. For action is bottled mitzusi harishan, except it's bottled from its root. So in other words, a flame with a torch, the bittul is complete, but I'm no longer a flame, now I'm part of the torch. But you're still in the family of a flame. So it's complete in that sense, but it's on a lower level. It's a complete bittul, but on a much lower level. Like he says in Perikutes in Tanya, he talks about the Neir and Avuka. When it comes to a flame and the sunlight, daylight, here it's not the same category. It's not on the same level. This is sun, and this is so it may not be that the etzem flame remains, but its expression is completely next. It has no meaning and significance. There you could say the flame inside the torch is no longer its personality it had before. It's not even. It no longer exists. But you can't say it was nullified. It's now part of a family called a bigger flame. Right. Here, the expression is not there, but it's nullified by something that's truly different. It's almost like what they say in advertising. They say, like, you want to have 1% attention of 100% of the people, or 100% attention of 1% of the people. So you can get someone's attention, people like let's say that are like ourselves, you get full of their complete attention. It's great, but you haven't really made inroads until you get the attention of people that are completely different than you are. Even though you may not get them, even though they may not be on the same level, like let's say we spread Chassidus among Chassidim. It's okay, that's great, but you still got you're preaching to the converted, and it could be that they're completely now elevated. But when you go out to a world where they're completely not on the same level that you are, and you bring something there, in a way it's a much deeper inroad, even though you haven't fully transformed them. Because it's a different, you're going, it's like cross-marketing, you're going in a world that's outside of you. I'm just giving you an example.
Simon in Manhattan.
Simon in China.
Simon is making inroads in Manhattan. What are you saying?
China doesn't realize China is the future.
You're only going to Korea.
Kabbalah in China.
Okay, now this is the dogma between Chesed and Chochmah. An example of this Yeshleim begins Chesed v'Chochmah. That Chesed, who Sfira Hadashena, Shnetzol made in Sof Atzmus Hamaitz. Chesed is the first Sfira that emerged from the divine light Atzmus Hamaitz. I know you're going to ask me, so where's Ak fit in and the Kav and Toyer and Tikkun? So let me say, remember Ak is Chesed Klali. So when we say Chesed, we mean it on all levels. So the first emergence of an entity is Ak, Chesed Klali. Kesser Sprati, the detailed Kesser is Kesser Vatsilis. So Kesser in general is the first emergence of any entity outside of Erein Sof. The first, let's call it, defined something. It's still will. Remember, Kesser is willpower. But will is already more than the essence. Or outside of this. Remember, from the beginning of the Hemshech, he talks about how will is what connects you with anything you want. You have to first want it. If you don't want it, there's nothing, no bridge, there's no interface. So Kesser is ultimately the mamutza. But how does the interface work? It's through Chachmas Timah. But I mean saying, but Kesser is because it's the first bridge. It's the bridge out of the essence. It brings the essence to it extends the essence, expresses the essence outside of itself. Okay. So that's Kesser the first. Well, that's a pardis harishon. According to the pardis, he's going to the details. According to the pardis, is the first result. Il v'ol, cause and effect. It's the first effect. Well, das harizal harizal idea tzimtzum, because the pardis doesn't know from the tzimtzum. So Kesser is the first expression of the divine. According to the Arizal, it's the first expression of the divine after the big concealment. Remember, Peter Kuf Samadal. It's just, he's being very thorough here and just explaining Kesser in every particular way. According to the Pardes, actually, Kesser in a way is more Ein Sof than the Arizal. But that's a separate discussion. So what do we know from, so since Kesser is the first, it's much closer to the source, to the Etzem. You see, what he's going to say is Chochmah is more bottle, but it's bottle not to the Etzem, it's bottle to the Avuka, to the mother flame, but it's in the same world. Because Kesser is the first entity outside of the Etzem, it's very close to it and senses it and wants to be part of it. And therefore, it relates to something that's completely from a different Mahus. So Kesser senses and relates more to the Atzmus, which is a completely different Mahus than Chachma will. But it's only going to be a bittul, the outside of Kesser, the external Kesser, is only going to be a bittul of its expression. But it's a bittul of expression of the flame to something that's completely different reality. That's
as opposed to Chachma, where it's really more
eskalulus, yeah, but it's not the Atzmus. It's not. It's eskalulus like the flame to a level that's a little more than the flame. So one second. So beginners kiddu yeser says the gabe Atzmus and mutl be'erechel gam b'chines hakesser. Mashenken a bittul the Chachma, however, the bittul of Chachma had a koster b'sefer shabenu sham shazel kamay bittul haner b'shoshem mekeidesh shazel b'mhus ha'esh. In Tanya Perik Yotes, he makes it clear that Chachma is the bittul like the flame in its root, which is a root called fire. It's not a root of the sunlight in the mashal, or the root of Atzmos. It senses its source. In other words, there's Atzmos, then there's a source of light called, let's call it the mother flame, or we call it Eish, Seda Eish, the element of fire. And Chochma is bottle, because it feels the source of flame, so like a candle, which is upward to its source. the source of the flame. I'll explain that in a moment. But not to the thing that's beyond, which is the essence itself, that's beyond it all. Yes, okay. So therefore, it's a lower bittul. It's more hiskalus, but less of a bittul. The real bittul and the real insignificance is kesser, that senses, like the flame senses something completely beyond. The bittul kesser l'gaba atzma she'ena begeder moker. He's bavaring now. Two things. Chachma also senses the source. Well, what is it? Because remember, we're not talking about a flame, a physical flame. But Kesser relates to Atzmus, who you can't even call a source. And Chachma relates to Atzmus, how it's part of, how it's a source.
Why is by Kesser it's not a source?
Because Atzmus really is beyond source. Real Atzmus, we learned, doesn't have, you can't even call Atzmus the source of existence. The source already creates a relationship. Kesser senses that element of Atzmus. That's why it senses something completely outside.
What, that it's beyond source?
Yeah, that is completely beyond anything in existence, right? And Chachma senses already a source. So Chachma, in other words, has some coordinate to relate to.
It's a ballpark.
It's outside of itself.
Chachma can relate to Kesser. Kesser can relate to Atzmus.
But it's diminished by Chachma.
So Chachma feels the etzem, shu mokra eir, feels the etzem that's a source of light. And through that it has bittul. It senses the source, and that ein zulaska, there's nothing but you. But it's nothing but you as a source. The gam, and then he adds one interesting footnote. The gam v'ursham, also in Tanya, he says, "Ein zeh shibchin skalos mamash." Even Chachma is not totally skalos. Ki ma shechefze lichol. It's what it wants to. It desires to.
Why you haven't the flame that goes into the fire?
But in Tanya he says it's the desire, meaning.
No, the real skalos is going to be Kesser.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh.
That's for sure. Ultimately.
Yeah.
No, the previous Kesser.
Yeah, previous
No, but what he's basically trying to say here is that ultimately it's somewhat outside of it. It's still something of it, has something. It doesn't explain it completely.
Yeah, but obviously it goes together. If it's a bittul of Chachma, can be pure skalos.
In the Likutei Sichos, in Chelik Vav Yisrei, and also in later Sichos, I think Meya Memtes, the Rebbetzon's Yartzeit, it's a Sicha where the Rebbe speaks about two explanations in Tanya. In Tanya it says that Chachma is the Keich Mesiras Nefesh. So a Jew feels that he's yearning to the source. An example he gives is Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. Like the flame, why does it go upward? Why does it transcend? Why does it gravitate? Why does it lick the air? It's because it's going to its source. So the question is it going to its source an expression of real utter bittul? Or is it really it's more yesh in a way?
It wants, so to speak.
It wants it because it's more of itself. It wants its mother flame. Here it's only its small flame. And he speaks the two things on Bittul, that they're two elements in light based on some avov, and I don't know if it's Tzechen's here, but I think it should be Tzechen. It's the same idea. So in other words, that wanting can be more, not necessarily complete Bittul. Because in other words, to say that the hiskalus, because it's in your own field, it's flame, you could argue it's not really Bittul. I mean, it's Bittul. Let's not get us. So this is Chachma. This is not Bina. It's not lower level. It's Bittul because it's a Bittul, but it's a Bittul that has. That completes you. It's a shlemus.
The same as the Rebbe said, it shouldn't make the bottle.
No, but there the meaning is the opposite. There the meaning is that bittul. There the opposite. Bittul, that bottle means that bittul can never disappear. That means that it's eternal. It's a whole different meaning. That's what the Rebbe would say. Not that you're explaining. Bittul could not be vetnish bottle could be nothing to do because it desires it. It could be just because the more it has it, the more it becomes real. The desire part is another aspect. But the bottom line is that Kesser, on the other hand, senses something completely apart, and it's like the flame, and it does. So definitely, it still exists, but its expression is completely nullified.
It's like a candle.
So it senses that much more. Let's put it this way: it senses how nothing but God exists on a much deeper level than Ein Zulase that Chachma. Because Chachma says nothing but God exists, but God is the source of existence. And Kesser says nothing but God exists, but it's higher than the source of existence. So existence itself is not that, it doesn't have that much significance from the Kesser's point of view.
Then we
so
have
it's
to
a deeper
define
bittul.
the source of existence yet to come, I guess, eh?
He already did define the source of existence.
This aspect that Kesser is negating, that essence is not even the source of existence, he already defined that.
Well, a few chapters ago, but now he's talking about this, how the lower levels sense it. In the next chapter, which you'll probably learn, then we'll review, he goes into explaining how these two levels, Kesser and Chachma, one senses, Chachma senses, Kesser senses how far God is, how distant, and Chachma senses that only He exists and nothing else. That's how he explains it now. Like Primi and Makif. And Lo Yoda will be that there's altogether nothing exists. And he's going to explain the difference. What I said, the difference is going to be that with Atzmus do you exist? Or even with Atzmus you don't exist. Lo Yoda, even with Atzmus doesn't exist. And Kesser, Okam, with Atzmus does exist. On its own it doesn't exist. So that's going to be the highest level is going to be that when you're in the two levels that go into the source. One, but when the source is there, I'm also here. The other one, even when the source is here, it's going to be Ayin Beis ultimately, yeah. And officially, the yesh that we are, when we learn these levels, they should be changing each part of us. Okay, we'll stop here.